The Simpsons has been on the air since the 17th of December, 1989. 36 seasons, nearly 800 episodes, the longest-running American animated series, the longest-running American sitcom, and the longest-running scripted primetime show in the entire history of television. And here is the thing that should quietly unsettle you as you settle in tonight. None of it was ever really a comedy. There are jokes, yes. There are gags and pratfalls and quotable one-liners that have burrowed so deeply into the cultural memory of the last 4 decades that most people can recite them without having ever chosen to memorize them. Homer falling down a hill, Bart writing on the chalkboard, the couch gag, the opening credits, the saxophone note that hangs in the air at the end of the theme and dissolves gently into the kitchen scene. All of that is real, all of that exists, and has always existed. But underneath it, hidden inside 36 years of Sunday night television, there is another show. A darker one, a slower one. One that does not announce itself with a punchline but instead builds its meaning the way water builds pressure behind a dam, quietly, invisibly, over years and decades, until the weight of it becomes impossible to ignore any longer. That is the show we are going to explore tonight. Get comfortable. Turn the lights down if you want them down. Let your breathing slow and settle into wherever you are sitting right now, because what follows is not a rapid-fire breakdown of trivia or a list of hidden Easter eggs. It is something closer to a long, slow walk through a town you thought you knew, taken at night, at the pace that actually lets you see what is there, rather than just the surfaces. By the time we are finished, Springfield will look different to you. The jokes will still be funny, the love between these characters will still be real, but the structure underneath that love and that comedy will be visible in a way it may not have been before. And visible things have a way of staying visible. Let us begin. Section 1. The yellow skin problem. What the color of every Springfield resident actually means. Start with something so obvious that it has become invisible. Every person in Springfield is yellow. Not every animated character in the history of television, not every cartoon family across the medium. The residents of Springfield, specifically, are rendered in a particular shade of yellow that sits somewhere between a ripe lemon and old newspaper left too long in a sunny window. This has been true since the very first episode aired in December of 1989. The show has never explained it. The characters have never commented on it. The audience accepted it within the first few minutes of the pilot and then filed it away under the general category of cartoon convention and moved on with their lives. But cartoon convention is a strange explanation when you actually examine it closely, because not all animated shows use yellow skin. The Flintstones did not use it. Scooby-Doo did not use it. Most animated families throughout the history of American television have been rendered in some approximation of natural skin coloration, whatever that might be for the specific characters being depicted. The choice to make The Simpsons, and by extension every single Springfield resident, yellow was a deliberate artistic decision made by specific people in a specific creative context, and like most deliberate artistic decisions, it came from somewhere and carries meaning outward from that somewhere. Matt Groening, the show's creator, has offered an explanation across various interviews over the years, and it is a practical one. He wanted the characters to be recognizable on television screens in a way that would register even from across a room. Yellow skin catches the eye in a way that beige or tan or any approximation of natural human coloration does not. The Simpsons yellow is, in this explanation, essentially a branding choice. A visual signature so distinctive that even a passing glance at a screen would tell you what you were looking at. Someone walking past a store window with a television in it. Someone in another room. Someone whose attention was only partially on the screen. The yellow would catch them. It still does. That explanation is true as far as it goes. It is also deeply incomplete, because the more interesting question is not why Groening chose yellow for the main family. The more interesting question is why yellow was then applied to every single person in Springfield without exception. The mailman is yellow. The doctor is yellow. The school teacher is yellow. The background characters who appear for 3 seconds in crowd scenes and are never named and never return are yellow. Every human being in Springfield exists within the same impossible shade regardless of age or gender or background or the decade in which their flashback sequences take place. And then the guest characters arrive. When celebrities step into the show's universe across hundreds of guest appearances spanning 36 years, They are drawn differently. Their proportions shift towards something more anatomically plausible. Their features carry a different quality of rendering. Their coloring reflects something closer to their actual appearance rather than Springfield yellow. This distinction has been consistent across the entire run of the show. The show draws outsiders as outsiders. It draws Springfield residents as Springfield residents. And the visual line between those two categories is so persistent across so many episodes and so many decades that it cannot be attributed to accident or inconsistency in the art direction. So, what does it mean? Within the internal logic of the show's own world, there is a theory, and it is one that the show has quietly supported through accumulated detail across its entire run without ever stating it directly. The yellow skin is not a cartoon convention. It is a mutation, a shared biological anomaly that has moved through the entire population of Springfield over decades of sustained exposure to something in the local environment, something in the water or the air or the food chain that draws from the same compromised ground. Something that has gradually, over generations of proximity, altered the physical appearance of every person who lives within the boundaries of this particular town. And the most obvious candidate for what that something might be is the thing that dominates Springfield's skyline, generates its electricity, employs a significant portion of its working population, and has been documented as leaking radioactive material into the local water supply since before most of its current residents were born. The nuclear power plant. The plant's safety record has been established within the show through specific detail in a specific episode, and the detail is genuinely extraordinary. 342 safety violations, cataloged with a specificity that the show frames as comedy but that would constitute, if read as documentary, one of the most damning environmental indictments in the history of American satire. Radioactive waste being disposed of in local waterways. Radioactive waste appearing on the playground of the elementary school where the town's children spend their days. A radiation signature detectable in the fish living in the ecosystem downstream from the facility. Blinky, the three-eyed fish. Blinky appears in Season 2 and becomes a brief but nationally significant phenomenon within the show's universe. A fish with an extra eye, pulled from a river that runs directly adjacent to the power plant, held up by a political candidate as evidence that Mr. Burns is poisoning the environment of the town he owns. Burns is forced to eat the fish on live television to demonstrate its harmlessness, to show that the contamination is not meaningful, that a three-eyed fish is a curiosity rather than a harbinger. The town watches, Burns eats, and then, as Springfield always does with the things it is not equipped to address, it moves on. Nobody tests the water in the aftermath. Nobody conducts a follow-up study. Nobody asks the question that should immediately follow the discovery of a three-eyed fish in the local water supply, which is a very simple question. If the fish are developing extra eyes from something in the river, what is the same something doing to the people who drink from the same river? The answer the show gives you, spread across decades of accumulated episodes in fragments and implications rather than in any direct statement, is that the something has been doing something to the people of Springfield for a very long time. And the most visible symptom of what it has done is the color of their skin. Homer Simpson's body is the most comprehensive piece of evidence the show presents on this subject. He absorbs punishment that should be fatal to any organism operating under normal biological parameters. He has been electrocuted, shot, struck by vehicles, thrown from heights, exposed to toxic substances across dozens of episodes, and has survived each of these encounters with a recovery rate that defies any explanation that fits within the range of ordinary human biology. His skull, when rendered in cross-section in one memorable episode, reveals a brain surrounded by what appears to be some kind of cushioning material that has accumulated around it over years of sustained trauma. His spine has been damaged and repaired so many times across the show's continuity that the show eventually stopped trying to maintain any coherent record of its structural integrity. Most analysis of Homer's physical resilience treats it as cartoon invulnerability. He is a cartoon character, and cartoon characters are conventionally indestructible. That explanation is sufficient for most viewing purposes. But the show has also given you very specific information about the source of Homer's cognitive limitations. In the episode where a crayon is found lodged in his brain from childhood, the show establishes that his measured intelligence is substantially below normal, that his cognitive function has been measurably reduced by a physical object that nobody detected or removed despite decades of contact with the medical establishment of Springfield. And when that object is finally removed, Homer becomes a measurably different person almost immediately. Articulate, thoughtful, capable of engaging with the world at a level that the crayon had been preventing. The crayon is the surface explanation. The deeper question is how it remained there for so long without any doctor finding it. Homer attended school. He had medical checkups. He has worked at a nuclear facility where worker health monitoring is supposedly a regulatory requirement. At some point across all of those institutional encounters, a medical professional should have found a foreign object in his skull. Unless the medical establishment in Springfield is compromised in the direction of not finding what it is not supposed to find. A medical establishment operated inside a town dominated by a nuclear facility owned by a man who has powerful reasons for not wanting difficult questions asked about the biological effects of his facility on the surrounding population, would have strong structural incentives to look past the things he would prefer remain unexamined. This is not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense of secret meetings and explicit instructions. It is the ordinary mechanics of economic leverage applied to professional practice. The largest employer in town funds the hospital. The hospital employs people whose continued employment depends on the continued approval of the largest employer. The approval of the largest employer is most reliably maintained by not producing results that the largest employer finds inconvenient. Crayon stays in Homer's brain. Now carry the yellow skin theory outward from Homer, through the rest of the family, and then through the wider town. Marge Simpson's hair grows straight upward from the crown of her head in a tower that has never in 36 years changed its shape, never required visible maintenance, never been explained through any mechanism that exists within the natural world. Her eyes carry the same slight protrusion you see in Homer, in Bart, in Lisa, in every Springfield resident with enough screen time for their individual features to register. She worked briefly at the power plant during one of the show's economic storylines. She was inside the same facility, exposed to the same environment, subjected to the same absence of adequate safety measures that Homer has been living inside for his entire adult life. Bart's hair spikes outward in multiple directions without product or deliberate styling. Lisa's hair maintains its perfect starburst shape through every weather condition and physical activity the episodes place her in. Maggie, who has been a 1-year-old infant for 36 years, displays the same eye shape and the same yellow skin and the same set of faint physical characteristics that do not appear in ordinary human infants. And here is the element of the theory that provides its most coherent foundation. When guest characters arrive from outside Springfield, they are not yellow. Their proportions are more natural. Their anatomy follows different logic. They look like people from somewhere else because they are from somewhere else, and the visual distinction between them and the permanent residents of Springfield is consistent enough to constitute a meaningful pattern rather than an incidental variation in art direction. The show draws outsiders differently because the show is maintaining a distinction that exists within the logic of its own world. The people who live inside Springfield's environmental conditions look a specific way. The people who visit from outside those conditions look a different way. The line between those two visual categories follows the geographic boundary of the town. Now extend this to the animals. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family's dog, displays the same bulging eye shape as the humans around him, the same deviation from realistic canine anatomy that parallels the family's deviation from realistic human anatomy. He is a Springfield animal who has spent his life in Springfield's environment, drinking Springfield's water, breathing Springfield's air. Blinky developed a third eye from the runoff of the power plant's operation. The show presents this directly and uses it as the centerpiece of a political episode, the implication fully stated by the candidate who holds the fish up for the cameras. The fish are mutating. The show makes the cause explicit. And then it expects the audience to believe that the exact same cause has had no effect on the biological organisms drinking from the same water and living in the same geographic area as the fish. The yellow skin of Springfield is the accumulated evidence of what happens when a population is exposed to decades of inadequately contained radiation from an inadequately maintained facility owned by a man with powerful incentives to ensure that nobody investigates the consequences. The show has been placing this evidence in front of its audience since 1989. episode after episode, season after season, through the color of every face and the shape of every eye, in every crowd scene and every family dinner and every moment set inside the boundaries of this town. It has been hiding in plain sight for 36 years. The town is sick. The sickness has a source. Every yellow face is a piece of evidence pointing toward the same thing, and the thing it is pointing toward has been operating unchallenged for over a century, providing the town's electricity and poisoning its water, and ensuring through its own continued dominance that the question of what it has done to the people living around it is never asked with enough persistence and enough institutional support to receive a real answer. Now, before we go any further, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there. It is a genuinely strange and moving thing to think about all the different places and hours that this voice is arriving in simultaneously. And if you want to stay for the whole journey tonight, subscribing means you will find your way back the next time something like this goes up. Section 1 continued. The mutation theory extended what the biology of Springfield actually says. The mutation theory does not rest on any single piece of evidence. That is actually what makes it credible rather than what makes it suspicious. Single pieces of evidence can be dismissed as anomaly, as coincidence, as the specific exaggeration that satire requires. The mutation theory rests on a cumulative weight of detail that the show has deposited across 36 seasons, in a form so gradual and so consistent that no single episode contains enough of it to force the conclusion, but the aggregate of all of them makes any other explanation feel insufficient. Let us go through what the show has actually established, in sequence, without the comedic framing that the individual episodes use to deliver it. The Springfield nuclear power plant has been identified in one specific episode as having 342 safety violations across its operational history. This number is not approximate or suggested by implication. It is stated directly in the episode, cataloged, presented with the specificity of an actual safety inspection report rather than the vague gesture toward regulatory failure that a less careful show might have used. 342 violations, each one representing a gap between what the facility is supposed to be doing and what it is actually doing. Each one representing a category of hazard that has been identified, measured, and then not corrected. The cost to remediate those violations was assessed at $56 million. This is also a specific number, not a rounded approximation. $56 million, representing the price of bringing a facility that has been operating in defiance of safety requirements into compliance with them. Burns was presented with this number and declined to pay it, not because $56 million represented a meaningful fraction of his available resources, because it did not. Because paying it would require acknowledging that the violations existed, and acknowledging that the violations existed would require acknowledging what the violations had already done. The radioactive waste disposal has been depicted across multiple episodes with a consistency that suggests it has been an ongoing practice rather than an isolated incident. Material from the plant has been shown in local waterways. It has appeared on the grounds of the elementary school. The specific form in which it appears in those episodes, the glowing green cylinder, the immediately recognizable visual shorthand for radioactive hazard, has been present in enough different locations across the show's run to indicate a pattern of disposal rather than a single accident. The water downstream from the plant produced Blinky, the three-eyed fish. This is not a disputed fact within the show's universe. The fish was caught. It was tested. The extra eye was documented. A political candidate used it publicly as evidence of environmental contamination and was not immediately dismissed as making an implausible claim. The show treated Blinky's existence as a recognized consequence of the plant's operation, something the town could see and discuss even if it was ultimately not willing to act on. From these established facts, the mutation theory draws its chain of inference. If radioactive material has been entering the local water supply and appearing on the local school grounds for the duration of the plant's operation, and the plant has been operating for decades, then every organism living within the environmental footprint of that disposal has been receiving some level of exposure. Fish receiving that exposure develop extra eyes. The animals in the show's world, Santa's little helper included, display physical characteristics that deviate from their species' normal parameters in ways consistent with long-term environmental exposure to mutagens. The people of Springfield drink from the same water and breathe the same air and eat from the same food chain that has been accumulating the plant's output since before most of them were born. The yellow skin is the uniform visual marker. But the mutation theory suggests that the skin color is the most visible of a set of biological alterations that extend well beneath the visible surface. The overbites, the eye shape, the four-fingered hands, which the show renders in a register that has always been accepted as the show's particular animation style, but which within the logic of the mutation theory represents the shared digital reduction of a population living in consistent proximity to teratogens during the prenatal development of each new generation. The most important piece of supporting evidence, however, is Homer's body. Homer Simpson's physical resilience has been tested in ways that go so far beyond the conventional cartoon invulnerability that it begins to suggest a different mechanism than simple cartoon logic. He has had objects fall on him from heights that should produce fatal injuries. He has been exposed to electrical current sufficient to stop a normal heart. He has been in vehicle impacts that should have destroyed the structural integrity of his skeleton. He has fallen from cliffs. He has been in fires. He has been in explosions. He has consumed substances in quantities that would constitute lethal doses in a normal human organism. He recovers from all of it, sometimes immediately, sometimes through a brief hospitalization in which the damage is addressed with the specific non-concern of a medical establishment that has become accustomed to his presentations. But always, without exception, he recovers. This recovery rate cannot be explained by ordinary cartoon logic, because the show itself has established, within its own universe, that fatal injury is possible, and that death is possible. Frank Grimes died. Maud Flanders died. People in Springfield die from things that are less extreme than what Homer regularly survives. The mutation theory offers a specific mechanism. Homer's biology, after a lifetime inside Springfield's contaminated environment and a working life inside the plant itself, has been altered at a cellular level in ways that affect its response to trauma. The same exposure that has reduced his cognitive function has simultaneously reorganized his physical biology in the direction of extraordinary resilience. The mutation that costs him intelligence gives him something else in return. His body reconstitutes itself after damage that should be permanent because his body is operating under different biological parameters than the bodies of people who have not been exposed to the specific combination of mutagens that Springfield's environment has produced. This is also why the German investors' first act upon acquiring the plant was to assess the cost of compliance and nearly go bankrupt from the estimate. They were operating under the assumption that a nuclear facility would have to follow the safety regulations that nuclear facilities are required to follow, and discovered that the specific cost of bringing this particular facility into compliance was prohibitive, precisely because the compliance had never been even approximated in the decades since the facility opened. The deficit between where the facility was and where regulations required it to be was so enormous that it constituted a structural barrier to any operator committed to legal operation. Burns's acquisition of the plant back from the German investors and his immediate rehiring of Homer resolved both problems simultaneously. A compliant safety inspector would require compliance. Homer ensures the appearance of safety monitoring while the monitoring does not occur. The deficit continues to accumulate. The violations continue. The waste continues to enter the environment. The population continues to absorb the exposure. And nobody, across 36 years of episodes, walks out of their yellow house in their yellow skin, with their four-fingered hand shielding their slightly bulging eyes from the morning light over the cooling towers, and asks the foundational question, why are we all like this? Section 2. The secret architecture of the Simpson marriage. There is a kind of love story that television almost never tells, because it is too quiet and too honest and too resistant to the conventional shape of romantic narrative to make for comfortable viewing in the usual sense. It is the story of two people who are fundamentally incompatible in nearly every measurable dimension, who found each other anyway, who built something together despite all the structural reasons the building should have been impossible, and who have stayed inside that something for decades. Not because staying is easy, but because the alternative requires them to become versions of themselves they are not certain they can recognize. Marge and Homer Simpson have one of the most examined marriages in the history of American television. The show has spent 36 seasons returning to it repeatedly, straining it to the point where it appears it must break, and then restoring it to something that looks, from the outside, like it did before the straining began. Critics and fans alike have pointed to this cycle as evidence of the show's structural inability to allow real consequences to stick, its unwillingness to let the marriage become something that reflects the actual passage of 36 years of shared life. But there is another way to read the cycle, and it is more honest and more interesting than the critique. The Simpson marriage does not reset because the writers cannot figure out how to let it evolve. It resets because the marriage is built on something so structurally fundamental to both of the people inside it that no single catastrophe can actually dismantle it from outside. The question worth sitting with is what that something is, because identifying it requires going further back than the show usually goes in any single episode, requires tracing the architecture of the marriage to the architecture of the people who constitute it, and the architecture of those people to the childhood circumstances that first shaped them. Homer's emotional architecture was built around an absence. Mona Simpson, his mother, was forced underground when Homer was a young child. She was driven out of Springfield by the man who would later become Homer's employer, identified during an act of political activism against that man's biological weapons laboratory, and pursued afterward by his resources and his connections with law enforcement until her return to her family became impossible. She left in the night while Homer was sleeping. She kissed him goodbye without waking him. She disappeared, and Homer woke up to find that his mother was gone. His father, Abe, constructed a lie around the absence rather than the truth. He showed Homer a grave. He told his son that his mother had died, and Homer spent the next 27 years of his life, through childhood and adolescence and young adulthood and marriage, and the birth of his children and the daily accumulation of his working life, believing that he was the son of a woman who had died and left him. Children who lose parents this way, even in the lie of it rather than the biological reality of death, do not simply grieve and move forward cleanly. The loss becomes a template, pressed into the architecture of every significant relationship that follows. It teaches something at a level so deep that ordinary adult reasoning cannot reliably reach it, does not unteach it. It teaches that the people you need most are also the people most capable of disappearing. That need itself is exposure. That the thing you cannot survive losing is precisely the thing that can be taken. Homer's need for Marge is built on this template. It is not the proportionate, freely chosen affection of someone who surveyed what was available and found in Marge the person they wanted most. It is the grip-tightening, world-organizing, occasionally suffocating attachment of someone who has learned at a depth that precedes language that the people who are most essential to you have a history of being there one morning and gone by the next without explanation. This is why Homer's jealousy in the episodes that explore it is so out of scale with whatever situation has actually triggered it. This is why his responses to even the suggestion of abandonment carry a quality of panic that seems wrong for the actual threat level. He is not reacting to the episode's circumstances. He is reacting to a morning in his childhood when he reached for his mother and found she was not there. Marge understands this on some level, even without having articulated it in those precise terms. The show has given her multiple episodes in which she comes genuinely close to the edge of the marriage, where the accumulated cost of loving Homer in the specific way that loving Homer requires becomes visible enough to constitute a real reckoning with whether the cost is worth the return. She does not leave, and the explanation the show most often reaches for is that she loves him, which is true, but which leaves out the specific quality of understanding that Marge has developed over decades of proximity to Homer's particular damage. She understands what it would do to him to be the second person to leave him, the first left in the night without saying goodbye. If the second left in daylight with her bags packed and her reasons clearly stated and her decision made, it would confirm for Homer something he has been carrying as a fear since he was small, the belief that he is the kind of person that people eventually leave. That his need is too large or his failure is too consistent or something about him is simply incompatible with being stayed for. Marge cannot make herself confirm that belief. This is not a simple thing. It is a mixture of love and a kind of ethical responsibility that she did not exactly choose, but that the specific circumstances of her marriage have made impossible to put down without feeling that the putting down is a cruelty. She loves Homer, and she knows things about Homer's damage that Homer himself cannot fully access, and the knowing creates an obligation that lives alongside the love, and that is sometimes genuinely difficult to separate from it. Now consider what Marge's own childhood prepared her to bring to this arrangement. The Bouvier household, as the show has depicted it across various flashback episodes, was one where Marge occupied the middle daughter position between the sharper-edged Patty and the dreamier Selma. The middle child position, when it settles into someone the way it settled into Marge, tends to produce a specific combination of skills and blind spots. The skills are the ones Marge has in obvious abundance: management, patience, the ability to read a situation quickly and calibrate her own behavior to what the situation requires. The ability to be the functional center of whatever system she is in while making the functioning appear to be something that simply happens, rather than something she is doing constantly with considerable effort. The blind spot is the question of what Marge herself wants, independent of what the people around her need from her. The person who builds their identity around being the capable one, the reliable one, the one who keeps things running, sometimes does so at the cost of developing a clear interior sense of their own desires and goals that exist separately from their usefulness to the people around them. The show has circled this blind spot many times, in the episodes where Marge tries to locate something that is hers alone. She paints, she writes, she gets a real estate license, she pursues a police career. She tries, periodically, to find some version of herself that exists independent of the family that requires her presence and her management, and her particular brand of patient, watchful love. These episodes are often read as the show punishing Marge for wanting something beyond the household, and there is something to that reading. But there is also something else in those episodes, something in the specific quality of how Marge's returns to the family are depicted. They are not always defeats. Sometimes they are choices, made with clear eyes, made by someone who has briefly inhabited the alternative and found it missing something that the family provides. The external world offers independence, but not the specific form of being needed that Marge has organized her sense of self around. The family is constraining, and it is also, in a way that the external world cannot quite replicate, hers. The most revealing episode in the show's long exploration of the marriage is the one where Homer's intelligence is temporarily restored through the removal of the crayon from his brain. In that episode, the gap between who Homer currently is and who Homer might have been becomes briefly, painfully visible. The restored Homer engages with Marge differently. He listens with more genuine attention. He responds with something that moves toward actual understanding rather than the approximate understanding that the ordinary Homer manages. He is, for the duration of the episode, someone capable of the kind of marriage that Marge might have had under different circumstances. And then, he puts the crayon back. He makes the choice to return to the limited version of himself, because the limited version is the version capable of existing inside Springfield's specific conditions, of holding the job and the relationships and the daily life that constitute his world. The intelligent Homer looked at Springfield and found it unbearable. He saw his job clearly for what it was and what it enabled. He saw the town clearly. The clarity was isolating in a way that the ordinariness of the crayon Homer life was not. So he chose the fog. Marge watches this happen. She watches him deliberately choose to become less than he briefly was. She understands why he is making the choice, and she continues to be married to the version of him that made it. What does that cost her? The show does not fully answer this question. It moves on, as it always moves on, to the next episode, and the next situation, and the next reset. But the question does not disappear. It accumulates in every subsequent episode, in every moment where Marge's patience requires more of her than patience usually does, in the specific quality of her expression in the scenes where she is listening to Homer explain something that reveals how much of what should be visible to him is not visible. She saw what he could have been. She is married to what he chose instead. The children carry the patterns of this marriage forward in the ways that children carry the patterns of the marriages they grew up inside. Bart has absorbed Homer's relational style more than his intellectual limitations. The approach of someone for whom forward motion and generated chaos are preferable to stillness, because stillness is where the uncertainty about whether you are loved enough tends to surface most prominently. Lisa has absorbed Marge's structural position more than her specific tolerance. the disposition of someone who carries things that are heavier than she should have to carry, because she has internalized the message that capable people carry what needs to be carried, even when what needs to be carried exceeds what anyone should be asked to lift alone. The marriage is the show's load-bearing structure in the literal sense. Everything The Simpsons is and has been across 36 seasons rests on the specific quality of what is between Homer and Marge. The comedy rests on it. The emotional resonance of the best episodes rests on it. The sense that this is a family that is real in some meaningful way, that its dynamics rhyme with something the audience knows from experience, rests on it. It is built on love. It is also built on damage, and the specific forms of damage that two people with difficult childhoods bring to the project of building a life together. The damage and the love are not opposites inside the marriage. They are inextricable from each other in the way that all long-term relationships eventually become inextricable from the circumstances that produce them. The couch on Evergreen Terrace is the symbol of all of this. The couch where the family lands at the end of every opening credit sequence. The couch where they sit together and watch television and exist in the specific way that this specific family exists is not just furniture in a cartoon set. It is the material expression of the marriage's primary achievement. Whatever happened this week, whatever crisis or catastrophe or near miss the episode contained, everyone is on the couch, together. That is what the marriage produces. Not perfect happiness, not freedom from damage or from the long shadows of the childhoods that shaped both of them. The couch, the family on it. It is a modest thing when described plainly. It is also, when you understand what it costs to maintain it, extraordinary. Section 3. Bart Simpson's Hidden Grief. The child who was never allowed to grow up. Bart Simpson was introduced to the world in 1989 as something close to a revolutionary, at least as close to a revolutionary as American network television had seen in a children's character to that point. In the years immediately following the premiere, Bart was everywhere, on t-shirts and backpacks and the margins of school notebooks, and the fronts of stores selling cheap plastic merchandise to parents who had not entirely figured out what their children were asking them to buy. He was the id of American childhood given a cartoon body and a catchphrase and a freedom from consequences that real children rarely experience. He said out loud the things that children think and never say. He talked back to authority with a cheerful impunity. He lived in a kind of gleeful, performed defiance that the adults watching recognized from their own childhoods as the posture they had always wanted to occupy and had never quite managed to sustain. The cultural machinery around Bart simplified him considerably. The merchandise and the media coverage turned him into a symbol, a product, an attitude more than a person. Underachiever and proud of it. Don't have a cow. The Bart of the t-shirts is pure surface bravado without interior, confidence without cost. The Bart of the show itself has always been something more complicated and considerably more melancholy. Here is the foundational fact about Bart that the cultural conversation around him has largely missed. He is a 10-year-old boy who has been 10 years old for 36 years. He has been on the verge of growing up for longer than most of his audience has been alive. He is permanently suspended in late childhood, in the specific developmental moment that falls just before things start to clarify. When a person is old enough to feel the full weight of the world pressing on them, but not yet equipped with the tools to understand what the weight is made of, his home life is loving in the specific and complicated way that Homer's love is loving, which is to say it is intense and well-intentioned and frequently expressed through a gesture that the show has coded as comedy for 36 years, but that, examined directly, is a parent placing his hands around his child's throat, the strangulation gag. The show's signature physical expression of Homer's relationship with Bart, which the audience has been conditioned through repetition and comedic framing to experience as warmth, rather than as what it would be called in any other context. The strangulation is real. The love it exists alongside is also real. The show has always asked the audience to hold both of these things simultaneously, and the audience has learned to do it. Homer's affection for Bart is genuine. The episodes that demonstrate this across hundreds of instances, in the moments of authentic tenderness that punctuate the chaos, in the scenes where Homer does something that costs him real effort or real ego in order to give Bart something Bart needs, are as warm as anything the show has produced. The love is not in question. What is worth examining is whether Homer's love gives Bart what Bart actually needs. And answering that requires looking at what Homer's love is shaped by. what emotional architecture it is operating out of. Homer's own model of fathering comes from Abe, and Abe's particular form of fathering is defined more by the gap between his love for Homer and his ability to express that love in ways that reach Homer than it is by any deliberate failure. Abe loves Homer. The show has established this clearly, but Abe's love has always been tangled up with his own disappointments and his own sense of grievance at a world that did not recognize his contributions, and the tangling has always made it difficult for the love to be simply and clearly what it is. The relationship between Abe and Homer is one of mutual incomprehension more than genuine connection. They love each other. They do not know how to be with each other. The gap between those two realities is the space where Homer's childhood happened. And Homer, having never been given a different model, reproduces a version of that gap in his own relationship with his son. Homer shows up. He is physically present in ways that Abe was not. He attends the events and coaches the teams and drags himself to the conferences. The presence is real and it is not nothing. But presence is not the same as seeing. Homer's experience of Bart is filtered through Homer's own ego and his own self-image in ways that are mostly invisible to Homer, but that are visible in the accumulated weight of how he responds to his son across hundreds of episodes. Bart's successes feel to Homer like personal validation. Bart's failures register for Homer as personal indictment. Bart's distress produces in Homer, before anything else, the specific anger of someone who experiences a child's pain as a logistical problem rather than as a signal worth investigating. Bart knows this. Children always know when they are being seen clearly, and when they are being seen through a lens that has more to do with the person looking than with the person being observed. And Bart's response to knowing it is the thing the show has always coded as comedy, but that is, when you look at it long enough, closer to heartbreak. The pranks and the schemes and the elaborate productions designed to disrupt whatever structure is nearest are the behaviors that got Bart on the t-shirts. They are also the behaviors of a child who has learned that the most reliable way to generate adult attention in his particular household is to do something significant enough to require a response. The strangulation, as dark as it is to contemplate directly, is at least consistent. Bart can produce it reliably. In a childhood where many things shift with Homer's mood and Homer's day, that specific consequence has its own kind of predictability. He knows how to produce it. He knows what it means when it happens. He knows the sequence that follows. In a childhood that lacks other forms of reliable structure, the specific predictability of that sequence offers something that functions like comfort, even though it should not. This is the most uncomfortable observation the show has buried in its comedy for 36 years. Not that Homer strangles Bart, which is visible and discussed, but that for Bart, there is something in the strangulation that is preferable to the alternative, which is not being responded to at all. Springfield Elementary is the other primary arena of Bart's story, and it is where the specific shape of his damage is most visibly in collision with institutional expectations. Bart is not unintelligent. The show has established this across episodes where he is given challenges that his particular cognition can engage with productively. He has genuine creative intelligence. He has social intelligence of a sophisticated variety, the specific ability to read a room quickly and determine what it wants from him and how to give it what it wants. He is funny in ways that require timing and observation, and the ability to construct something unexpected from available materials. These are not the gifts that Springfield Elementary is equipped to recognize or reward. The school operates on the model of structured academic performance in predetermined formats, delivered through sequential instruction. Bart's mind does not engage reliably with that format. His attention does not structure itself in the directions the classroom needs. So he fails, not because he cannot think, but because the available form of thinking does not match the available form of assessment. The failure accumulates. And in a child who is already managing the specific wound of a father who experiences Bart's failures as personal indictments, the accumulation of academic failure produces a relationship with learning that is almost impossible to disentangle from the rest of the pain in his life. He stops trying to succeed academically, not because the effort would be futile, but because the cost of visible effort followed by visible failure is, given everything else happening in his interior life, more than he has decided to pay. Not trying and failing is still failing, but it is failing on terms that Bart controls. He chose not to try. The failure belongs to the performance rather than to the real person underneath the performance. This is the specific self-protection of the child who has learned that visible effort followed by visible failure exposes the caring, and that exposing the caring exposes the vulnerability, and that the vulnerability is exactly what he has spent years building defenses around. The defenses are good. The show has given Bart excellent defenses. And the excellence of the defenses is itself evidence of the depth of what is being protected behind them, because people build defenses proportional to what they are afraid to lose. The loneliness underneath all of it is the element the show returns to most carefully and most quietly across all 36 years. Not in every episode, because the comedy cannot sustain it in every episode, but in the episodes that let the performance slip, in the moments where the defended interior becomes briefly visible, the loneliness is there. Specific and real, and not at all funny in the way that it is funny when it is wrapped in the performance. He has been 10 years old for 36 years, permanently on the threshold of the understanding that would let him look back at his childhood from a distance and see its shape, always about to arrive at that understanding, never quite getting there. The show has imagined him older. Adult Bart in the flash-forward episodes is someone who never quite got out from under the trajectory his childhood established. The charm is still there. The warmth is still there, surfacing when the performance drops. The underachievement is still there in a new form. Adult Bart is Bart at 10 with adult-scale consequences attached to the same patterns. There is something devastatingly honest in that portrait. The things that shape us in childhood do not simply dissolve when we cross the chronological line into adulthood. They follow us and find new forms. The child who builds elaborate performances to manage his father's responses to him becomes the adult who performs in every room he walks into, not because performance is what he wants from his life, but because performance is the tool he was given early and practiced for years and knows how to use with a fluency he cannot quite achieve in any other mode. Bart Simpson is the funniest character on the show, across all the years and all the jokes and all the moments the show has built around him. He is also, quietly, one of its most carefully broken ones. The comedy and the damage live in the same body, at the same age, in the same freeze, for the same 36 years. Section 4. Lisa's isolation and the town that punishes intelligence. There is an experience that a certain kind of child has, and it is not rare exactly, but it is specific enough that the people who have had it recognize it immediately when they encounter its depiction in fiction. It is the experience of being the most intelligent person in most rooms you enter, and having that fact be, consistently and reliably, a source of loneliness rather than of power or pleasure or any of the social rewards that intelligence is sometimes supposed to generate. Not because intelligence is inherently painful in some abstract philosophical sense, because the specific intelligence this child possesses is oriented in a direction that most of the people around her cannot follow, and she has known this for long enough that she has stopped being surprised by the gap and started grieving the permanence of it. The gap is not getting smaller. The gap is simply how things are. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She plays the saxophone with a musicality that the show has established as genuinely extraordinary, a natural gift that she has developed, not because anyone instructed her to, but because music is the medium in which her particular kind of intelligence can express itself most freely. She reads compulsively and voraciously, engaging with texts that are well beyond anything her grade level requires, arguing in her interior monologue with the ideas she encounters in ways that the show occasionally surfaces, and that reveal a mind working at a register that very few people in her environment can access. She engages with ethical and political questions as genuinely urgent, as things that matter in ways that extend beyond the exercise of seeming to care. She is a vegetarian in a family of committed meat eaters, an environmentalist in a town whose most significant industrial feature has a 342 violation safety record, a Buddhist in a community that treats organized religion primarily as a social obligation to be fulfilled on specified days and otherwise not particularly thought about. She is, in almost every dimension the show has given her, constitutively out of place. And the show has always been careful to establish that this out-of-placeness is not something Lisa is imagining or performing or exaggerating for effect. It is real. The world of Springfield genuinely cannot accommodate what Lisa is. Not because the people in it are malicious, though some of them are careless in ways that amount to the same thing. Because the structure of Springfield is built around certain assumptions about what people are for and what kinds of intelligence and engagement are worth rewarding, and those assumptions leave very little room for the specific kind of person Lisa is. Springfield Elementary is the most visible institutional expression of this. The school has been established throughout the show as an institution operating under conditions that make its official mission very difficult to accomplish. Inadequate funding, overcrowded classrooms, teachers who arrived with intentions and have spent careers discovering the gap between intention and institutional circumstance. Principal Skinner, or the man who goes by Principal Skinner, administering an institution that is doing its institutional best inside constraints it did not create. For Lisa specifically, the school's primary limitation is not any of those things, though all of those things are real and real in their effects. The primary limitation is that the school was designed to serve a general population, and Lisa is not anywhere within the range of what general means in this context. She does not simply sit at the top of the general population. She exists outside the distribution the school was designed to accommodate, in a range that the school's curriculum and pacing and structure were not built to reach. The school can give Lisa things to do. It cannot give her intellectual challenge at the level she needs it. It cannot give her teachers who are equipped to develop her gifts rather than simply administer to them. It cannot give her peers who are working at a similar pace and who share the referential landscape she already inhabits. So Lisa reads. She plays the saxophone. She builds an inner life so rich and so fully realized that it constitutes in some functional sense an alternative to the outer world that cannot quite hold her. The books are full of people who thought the things she thinks and found ways to survive the experience of thinking them in places that were not built to accommodate that kind of thinking. The saxophone is a language she can speak without translation, without the reduction that translating her interior experience into words for the Springfield audience always requires. These are genuine resources. She is not simply suffering. The inner life she has built is genuinely rich, and it sustains her. But it is not a replacement for the outer engagement that she also needs. Lisa knows this. The show has always shown her knowing this. The saxo is played alone more often than for an audience, and the aloneness is not chosen out of preference. Homer's love for Lisa is genuine and is among the most emotionally affecting material the show has produced across its entire run. The episodes that let Homer and Lisa actually connect, that find the specific register on which they can reach each other despite everything that should prevent them, are among the show's most resonant moments. Homer learning something about jazz because Lisa loves jazz. Homer sitting through a school event that bores him past his usual tolerance because his daughter is performing. Homer's face when Lisa is hurt or discouraged. The love is real and it is fierce and it is not in question. What is in question is whether Homer's love can give Lisa what she actually needs, which is less the emotional presence of a devoted father and more the intellectual engagement of someone who can meet her where she actually is. Homer cannot meet her there. The cognitive gap between them is too wide for Homer to cross with any consistency, and this is not a failing on Homer's part in the moral sense. It is simply a fact about who the two of them are and what their particular combination makes possible. Marge sees Lisa more clearly than Homer does. The episodes between them have a quieter quality and a more sustained tenderness, built on a shared language that comes from two people who have both experienced being the most capable person in a situation and having that capability be invisible to the people benefiting from it. Marge knows what it is to apply intelligence and care to something and have the application be treated as background rather than as achievement. She recognizes that pattern in Lisa. But Marge's support for Lisa is also limited by Marge's characteristic mode of response, which is management. She manages Lisa's disappointments the way she manages everything else, with love and competence and a gentle smoothing of the roughest edges of whatever the actual situation is. What Lisa needs in the hardest moments is not management. It is someone sitting with her inside the difficulty and acknowledging it as difficulty rather than immediately moving to make it less so. Management and witness are different things. They require different capacities. Marge has developed management with extraordinary skill. Witness is harder. The result is that Lisa carries a great deal of her interior experience alone, not because she is unloved. She is deeply loved. But the love is not equipped to go where she most needs company. The saxophone fills some of that space. The books fill more. And underneath both of those, there is the knowledge that Lisa has carried since she was old enough to have it. She knows she is going to leave Springfield. This knowledge is the organizing fact of her relationship to her current life. It is what makes Springfield livable in the present tense. It is also what makes her current situation in it strange, in a specific and quietly devastating way. She is a person who is passing through, who knows she is passing through, who cannot yet leave but who has already oriented herself in the direction of the departure that is coming. She inhabits Springfield fully because she has no other option. She also inhabits it from a slight distance, with the specific quality of attention that belongs to someone who has already decided that where they are is not where they will always be. In the flash-forward episodes, adult Lisa is someone who got out, who found a different kind of context, who encountered people capable of the kinds of conversations she has been trying to find interlocutors for in Springfield and failing consistently to locate. The specifics of the adult Lisa's life vary somewhat across different flash-forward episodes, but the constant is that she left. The departure happened. The intelligent child who was suffocating in the wrong environment found the right environment. The show will never show that departure occurring in the present tense, because showing it would mean allowing Lisa's arc to conclude, and allowing her arc to conclude would mean acknowledging that the loop can be broken, that there is a way out of Springfield for the people inside it. So Lisa remains 8 years old and keeps playing the saxophone in her room at night, alone, and the notes drift out into the Springfield air, and the show keeps running, and the departure that she knows is coming keeps being something that happens in a future the show will never quite reach. Section 5. The real story of Ned Flanders' programmed kindness and the God who stays silent. Ned Flanders greets every morning with the same quality of presence. A warm word for whoever he encounters. A readiness to help that is so immediate it sometimes appears to precede the request for help. A faith that is so consistently interwoven with his daily life that it functions less like a belief he has arrived at through deliberation and more like the air at the specific altitude he inhabits. He is, by almost any measure you might apply, the best neighbor anyone in Springfield has ever had. He is also one of the most carefully destroyed characters in the show's history. The destruction accumulates slowly across episodes and seasons without ever arriving in the form of a single decisive blow. And because it arrives slowly, wrapped in the comedy of a cheerful character in a cheerful show, it is possible to watch years of Ned Flanders episodes and come away feeling that nothing particularly significant has happened to him, that he is simply a warm background figure whose function is to be nice and to provide contrast with Homer's warmth plus chaos. But let us trace the shape of what the show has actually done to Ned over 36 years. Maude, Ned's wife, was killed at a NASCAR event by a t-shirt fired from a promotional cannon. The absurdist mechanics of this death are part of the comedy, and the comedy is genuine. The specific escalation of promotional merchandise into lethal projectile is exactly the kind of comedic invention the show has always been good at. But the comedy is in the setup. What follows the setup is handled without comedy at all. Maude is gone. Ned is a widower. Rod and Todd, his sons, are motherless in a specific and permanent way. The house next door to The Simpsons is fuller of her absence than it is of anything present in it. And the reason Maude was in the path of the t-shirts was Homer. Homer was moving through the bleacher area in his characteristic way, taking up space and generating motion without particular concern for the people whose space he was moving through. And the t-shirts that were aimed at the space he vacated found Maude in the space he had just left. Homer's selfishness did not intend this outcome. It never intends any of its outcomes. The selfishness is not malicious. It is the specific absence of consideration for what happens to the people in the immediate vicinity of whatever Homer is doing, and sometimes what happens to those people is catastrophic. Ned forgave Homer. He forgave him with the complete and genuine forgiveness that has characterized Ned's responses to Homer's impact on his life across decades of proximity. A forgiveness that leaves no visible residue of grievance, that is delivered without condition and without the kind of evident, ongoing pain that forgiveness in less extraordinary circumstances tends to carry. Ned forgave because Ned was conditioned to forgive. This is not metaphor. It is the canonical explanation provided by the show itself, in the episode where Ned's conditioning fails and he is institutionalized, and the psychiatrist who treats him uncovers the foundation of what Ned's behavior has always been built on. Ned was a violent child, not aggressive in the ordinary way of children, who test boundaries and occasionally bite, whose self-regulation systems are simply not yet fully developed. Genuinely, persistently violent. His parents, being committed to a free-spirited, non-authoritarian philosophy of child-rearing, had neither the tools nor the inclination to address it directly. They took him to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist used behavioral modification techniques, applied consistently over an extended period, to suppress Ned's aggression with a completeness so thorough that when the therapy was finished, Ned's access to anger had been not diminished but effectively removed. This is the origin of his kindness, not a character trait arrived at through reflection and choice, a behavioral modification installed before the person who would make that kind of choice had fully formed. His niceness is not, in the truest sense, his. It is a pattern placed inside him by someone else, around a child whose own nature was never given the opportunity to develop into whatever it would have developed into without the intervention. Once you know this, Ned's patience with Homer reads differently. When Homer drills holes in Ned's walls and borrows equipment without returning it and parks in his space and says the wrong thing at every possible opportunity and causes the death of Ned's wife through the specific quality of his physical presence in the world, Ned smiles and finds something generous to say, not because he has looked at his options and selected generosity as the most fitting response, because the option of responding otherwise was systematically removed from him in a therapist's office before he was old enough to have chosen to be there. Ned's faith is the most complex element of his character, and the least fully examined by the show's critical reception. He prays with a regularity and a sincerity that the show has never mocked in any reductive way, even when it finds gentle comedy in the specific forms his faith takes or the applications he makes of it. He attends church without fail. He reads scripture with the attention of someone who finds it genuinely productive of meaning. He has oriented the principles of his daily life around what he understands his faith to require, which means that when the world around him fails to honor those principles, the failure registers not just as personal disappointment but as something that requires theological engagement. And here is the element of Ned's theological situation that the show has developed, carefully and quietly, across its entire run. God speaks to Homer. This has been established clearly and repeatedly across multiple episodes. Homer has direct, face-to-face, substantive conversations with a divine presence that presents itself as God, and that has engaged with Homer personally in exactly the way that the scriptures Ned studies describe as the relationship the divine seeks with humanity. Homer has been visited, guided, given specific information, engaged in genuine dialogue by whatever the show's universe contains as its divine presence. Homer, who sleeps in church? Who cannot recall a verse of scripture when prompted? Who approaches religious observance with the same cheerful inattention he brings to everything that does not immediately involve his immediate comfort or his family's safety? Who has never demonstrated the slightest evidence of an active spiritual practice in any conventional sense? God does not speak to Ned. The show has never, across 36 years of depicting Ned as Springfield's most consistently devout character, given us a moment in which Ned's prayers receive the kind of direct, personal, conversational response that Homer's accidental and oblique reaching toward the divine repeatedly generates. Ned prays. He believes. He holds his faith through the death of his wife and the destruction of his house and the ongoing experience of living next door to the person who constitutes the single most consistent source of loss in his life. And the God he prays to is simply not there for him in the way it is there for Homer. What the show has constructed here, through years of careful juxtaposition, is a universe in which divine attention operates not according to the merit of the person seeking it, but according to the noise level of the person's need. Homer's need is enormous and loud and unembarrassed about announcing itself to whatever might be listening. He does not pray in any conventional sense. He simply needs things, constantly, in ways that the universe of the show keeps responding to because his need is the engine of the narrative, and the engine cannot stop. Ned's need is managed. His faith provides a framework for managing it, for processing disappointment and loss, and reframing them as parts of a plan whose dimensions he cannot fully see. His behavioral conditioning gives him the tools to continue functioning without the expression of pain that the pain merits. He is, from whatever is responsible for distributing divine attention in Springfield's universe, the person least likely to generate a response because he is the person most thoroughly equipped to handle not getting one. The breakdown episode shows you what decades of unprocessed pain looks like when the conditioning temporarily fails. A hurricane destroys Ned's house. The community rebuilds it with good intentions and insufficient skill. It collapses. And Ned, who has absorbed decades of indignity and loss and Homer, cracks. What emerges from the crack is not gentle exasperation. It is the accumulated pain of a person who has been prevented from feeling pain for decades and who has therefore been storing it unprocessed in whatever the behavioral conditioning uses for storage. He names the people who have been failing him. He drops the performance of patient good humor for long enough for the audience to see what the performance has been covering. And then he is hospitalized. The therapy reinstalls the modification. Ned goes back to being Ned. But the show showed you what was there underneath. The thing that the niceness has always been managing. And the thing is enormous, earned through genuine and repeated loss, and entirely legitimate. Ned Flanders is the show's most careful portrait of what moral seriousness costs in a world that does not reliably reward it. Not someone brought low by a fatal flaw. Someone who did everything right and found that the doing of everything right does not protect you from loss or guarantee that your faith is answered or ensure that the people around you treat you with anything approaching what you have given them. He will greet Homer tomorrow morning with something warm. That is either the most admirable thing about him or the most heartbreaking, depending on what you believe about the distance between a chosen virtue and an installed one. Section 6. The Springfield economy: how one man built a town around his own interests. Think about the economy of the town you know best. Think about who the largest employer is or was, and what happened when that employer had a difficult year, and how the difficulty moved through everything that was economically connected to that employer's health. Think about who owns the primary infrastructure, the power supply, the water system, the land that the commercial buildings sit on. Think about how that ownership shapes the community over time, not through any single dramatic act, but through the accumulation of decisions that ownership makes possible and the accumulation of decisions that it forecloses. Now place Charles Montgomery Burns in that role, in the town of Springfield, for over a century. Burns does not simply own a factory in Springfield. He owns the conditions under which Springfield is capable of existing at the scale and in the form that it currently takes. The town without the plant is a different and smaller and considerably less economically viable entity. Everyone in Springfield understands this, not as an articulated thought that they carry around consciously, but as the background assumption that shapes every decision about whether and how to challenge anything about the plant or the man who owns it. This is the mechanism of ownership at the scale Burns operates at. He does not need to threaten people. He does not need to remind residents of his indispensability. The economic structure does that work for him, continuously and invisibly, in the specific way that structural power operates, through the organization of the environment, rather than through direct application of force. The power that organizes the environment is ultimately more durable and more complete than the power that applies force directly, because the environment persists even when Burns is not personally in the room. Look at how the political system reflects this. Mayor Quimby has held office across essentially the entire run of the show, a tenure that reflects something about how political incumbency functions in an environment where the dominant economic force and the political establishment have organized themselves into a relationship of mutual accommodation. Quimby is depicted as corrupt in the comedy sense, openly and cheerfully extracting personal benefit from his office in ways that the show renders as comedy because the openness of it is itself the joke. But underneath the cartoon corruption, there is a structural relationship between Quimby's office and Burns's economic dominance that the show depicts accurately even while rendering it in satirical shorthand. The relationship is not primarily one of explicit bribery, though bribery occurs. It is primarily one of aligned interests. Quimby cannot meaningfully challenge Burns because challenging Burns would threaten the economic foundation that Springfield's revenue base rests on, and a depleted revenue base means Quimby cannot do the things that sustain his political position. The alignment between the largest economic force in a community and the political establishment that governs it does not require explicit coordination. The alignment produces itself through the ordinary mechanics of each party acting in its own interest. The regulatory environment reflects the same alignment in a different institutional register. Springfield's nuclear facility has been cited for violations, has had those violations assessed and costed, has had Burns presented with the cost of compliance, and Burns has consistently found the cost of non-compliance more manageable than the cost of addressing what the violations represent. The management of the non-compliance has been maintained through the combination of political influence, legal resources, and the fundamental leverage of economic dominance that makes sustained regulatory enforcement against Burns considerably more expensive than the enforcement budget of any Springfield regulatory body. The 342 violations are still violations. The plant has never been brought into compliance and will not be brought into compliance because bringing it into compliance would require a sustained institutional commitment from regulatory bodies that are themselves operating inside the economic and political environment that Burns has shaped. What Springfield has produced instead is Homer Simpson, the safety inspector. Homer's job title bears no relationship to what Homer actually does at the plant, which is occupy the seat designated for safety monitoring while the monitoring does not occur. This has been established with unusual clarity in the episode where German investors briefly acquire the plant and immediately attempt to bring it into compliance. The investors assess the violations, they calculate the cost of addressing them. The cost nearly bankrupts them. Burns buys the plant back and rehires Homer. A competent safety inspector is an existential threat to the plant's operation in its current form. Homer is the plant's most effective structural defense against competent safety inspection, not because Homer is actively protecting the plant, but because Homer's specific combination of incapacity and genuine good intentions produces exactly the outcome the plant's continued operation requires. The appearance of safety monitoring without the reality. This is not negligence on Burns's part in the sense of failing to notice. Burns knows precisely what Homer is, and precisely what Homer does and does not do at the plant. He kept Homer employed through the German investors' purchase and buyback precisely because he understood what Homer's replacement would mean for the facility. The deal with Abe Simpson, established in a later episode, adds a layer beneath this. Burns committed some crime, the specifics varying slightly across the episodes that address it. Abe discovered the crime or came into possession of evidence of it. A deal was struck. Abe's silence in exchange for a guarantee of Homer's employment, irrevocable and permanent regardless of Homer's performance. Homer's job security, which the show has always presented as one of the more inexplicable features of his existence, has a perfectly explicable foundation. It is the legacy clause of a private agreement between two men, one of whom needed something buried and one of whom needed his son to have a future. Homer's employment is a debt paid to his grandfather's silence, by the man who drove Homer's mother underground. Homer does not know this. The specific information that would allow Homer to understand the architecture of his own employment, and by extension the architecture of his own life as it has been shaped by Burns's actions and Burns's agreements, has been kept from Homer across his entire adult life. This is consistent with how the most important information about Homer's life has always been distributed: the truth about his mother, the origin of his job, the specific connections between the various things that have most fundamentally shaped him. All of it withheld, not through any single conspiracy, but through the cumulative effect of the people around Homer deciding that the information would do more damage than it would do good. Or perhaps the people around Homer deciding that the information would do more damage to them than it would do to Homer. Burns's power over Springfield is not dramatic. It does not stride through the town in a top-hat-making pronouncements. It operates through the ordinary mechanics of economic dependency, creating political alignment, creating regulatory capture, creating the specific environment in which an institution with 342 safety violations can operate for decades without producing consequences that reach the people responsible for it. It has been operating this way for over a century, and the people inside it experience it not as power but as simply how things are. Section 7. Death in Springfield. The question of who gets to stay gone. Death should be the one thing that sticks. Outside of Springfield's particular physics, death is the final consequence. The thing that cannot be undone through apology or effort or the passage of time. The event that produces a permanent rearrangement of the world around it, because the person who was there is no longer there, and the people who knew them must reorganize themselves around an absence that does not resolve. In Springfield, death does not quite work like that. This is partially shared with other long-running serialized fiction, which has a generally complicated relationship with permanent character death. The economic value of popular characters, the audience attachment that makes killing them costly in a business sense, the creative flexibility that keeping them alive provides, all of these incentives work against the narrative finality that death in reality carries. Characters in long-running fiction come back. The deaths turn out to have been faked, or dreamed, or subject to a reversal mechanism that a subsequent episode provides. But Springfield's relationship with mortality is more interesting and more internally coherent than ordinary survivorship bias, because the show has given it a logic that makes it explicable within the world it has constructed, rather than simply as a function of commercial necessity. Hans Moleman is the most extreme expression of this logic. If you have watched the show for any sustained period, you know Hans Moleman. He is the tiny, elderly, nearly blind background character who functions as Springfield's designated vessel for harm. He is crushed. He is incinerated. He is buried alive. He is eaten by animals. He walks into traffic. He suffers, in canonical non-dream episodes that are supposed to represent the show's actual reality, deaths that would be completely final in any world operating under the biological parameters that the real world operates under. And then he appears in the next episode, entirely intact. The show does not explain this. It does not comment on it. Moleman's cycling deaths and resurrections are presented as texture rather than as events requiring investigation or explanation. But there is something he said about himself. In one episode, delivered without any apparent awareness of its implications. He is 31 years old. Look at Hans Moleman. He appears to be in his 80s or 90s. His body carries the visible marks of extreme age. He moves with the careful difficulty of someone whose physical infrastructure has been substantially worn down by time. He is, by every observable characteristic, a very old man, and he is 31. Something aged him catastrophically beyond his chronological years. Something took a man in the early part of his adult life and produced in him the appearance of a person who has lived perhaps 60 years beyond what his birth date would account for. And the same something, or some related consequence of the same something, appears to have made him resistant to permanent death. The radiation theory, which we explored through the lens of yellow skin in the first section, has a specific application to Moleman that goes beyond what it explains about the general population. Long-term exposure to radiation does not produce uniform outcomes across the individuals it touches. It produces mutation, and mutation is by its nature variable. Most mutations are harmful in straightforward ways. Occasionally, the interaction between a specific mutation and a specific organism's existing biology produces something unexpected. Moleman's biology, under the radiation theory, has been altered in a way that simultaneously aged him rapidly and removed death's permanence as a constraint. Whatever happened at the cellular level, the change that produced the appearance of extreme old age also produced a cellular reconstitution capacity that restores function after events that should foreclose it permanently. He dies. His system shuts down, and then it restarts. The cycle continues. Death in Springfield, for Moleman specifically, has become a condition rather than an event, a temporary state that his particular biology keeps reversing. Now look at the deaths that do stick, because the contrast is as revealing as the pattern. Maud Flanders died and stayed dead. Her death has been present in every subsequent episode as a weight that the show has never allowed to dissolve. Frank Grimes died in one of the show's most philosophically pointed hours, and his death was permanent precisely because the permanence was the argument of the episode. Mona Simpson died in one of the show's most genuinely moving sequences, and her death too was carried forward as an emotional reality rather than a plot point to be resolved or reversed. What these permanent deaths share is that the narrative requires their permanence. Maud's death enables the exploration of Ned's grief and the theological questions her loss raises for him. Frank Grimes's death is the proof of his episode's central argument, that the rules of consequence operating in Springfield are specifically not the rules that apply to a person who actually experiences the costs of what the world around him does. Mona's death is the culmination of a storyline spanning multiple seasons, and allowing her to survive would prevent the emotional weight of 27 years of separation from landing as it needs to land. The deaths that do not stick are the deaths of characters whose continued absence serves no sustained narrative purpose. Mulman dies because Mulman's death is always a texture note, a piece of color in someone else's scene rather than an event in his own story. He can return because his return costs nothing narratively, and his presence is needed for the background of the next scene. This is coherent as a theory of serialized storytelling, but there is something darker in it when you allow the implication to land. The characters who matter enough to have permanent deaths are the characters who have been given enough story that their deaths change things. Hans Moleman can die weakly, because Hans Moleman has not been given a story whose continuation his absence would disrupt. He exists to populate the background of other people's stories. His deaths are not tragic within the show's world, because his life has not been given enough narrative weight to make them tragic. He is 31 years old and he looks 90, and he is crushed and incinerated and eaten and hit by vehicles, and he is always there again next week, in the background, slightly to the left of whatever the story is actually about. That is not comedy. That is what complete invisibility looks like when it is absolute, and Springfield contains a great deal of it. People who die in the margins and return without comment because their lives and deaths are happening in the spaces where the narrative has decided not to look, in the parts of Springfield that belong to people who were never given enough story to make their deaths something the story needs to account for. The hierarchy of who matters in Springfield is written in who is allowed to stay gone. Section 8. The Women of Springfield. A pattern across 36 years. Across 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes, The Simpsons has created hundreds of female characters. Some of them are major recurring figures whose presence across the show's run constitutes a genuine sustained portrait. Some are one-episode figures who arrive, make a specific impression, and depart. Some are background figures who recur in crowd scenes without ever being given the kind of attention that would make them individuals rather than population. The female cast of Springfield is not a monolith, and it is not simple. The show has given genuine care and genuine complexity to female characters across its history. The pattern that runs through the depiction of those characters is not a pattern of negligence or indifference. It is more interesting and more persistent than that. Across the diversity of female characters in Springfield, the women are almost always defined in relation to what they absorb and what they continue to produce through the absorbing of it. Marge Simpson is the most complete expression of this pattern, and we have explored her in earlier sections from the angle of the marriage. But the pattern is visible most clearly in Marge's case, because her character has been most fully developed, because the show has returned to her most often and given her the most screen time, and because the specific shape of what she does and how she does it has accumulated into a portrait that is as honest about its costs as anything the show has produced. What Marge does is invisible because it works. The household functions. The children are cared for. The crises are addressed. The family continues to exist as a functional unit. And because these things happen, they appear to happen naturally, as though the household would run this way regardless of who was at its center, as though the specific quality of Marge's attention and management was simply how households are rather than an achievement that requires sustained, costly, invisible effort. The first time the show made Marge's labor visible, it did so by removing it and showing the audience what happened in its absence. The household did not continue running at a slightly reduced efficiency. It dissolved into a specific kind of chaos that revealed how thoroughly the functioning had always depended on Marge's specific management. The chaos was played for comedy, but the comedy was built on a genuine and specific truth, that the work Marge does is the load-bearing infrastructure of her family's life, and it only becomes visible when it stops. Patty and Selma, Marge's sisters, represent the pattern in a register that the show handles with less care and more ambivalence. They are defined primarily by the disappointment of romantic lives that went differently than they hoped, and by the specific armor they have built around that disappointment in the form of sardonic commentary. The bitterness is genuine and it is earned. It is also a performance, a way of being publicly at peace with a private dissatisfaction by transforming it into a stance rather than a wound. The show has used their romantic situations primarily as a source of comedy, which is legitimate because the situations are genuinely funny And the comedy has always had a slightly uncomfortable quality because it is largely built on treating the longing of two women for connection as inherently ridiculous, as the kind of want that is funny rather than the kind of want that is simply human. Edna Krabappel is the female character the show developed most fully over the longest period, and the character whose depiction came closest to granting her the full personhood that the male characters have generally been given. Her professional frustration was specific and real and rooted in actual conditions. Her romantic life had texture and history. Her relationship with Skinner, or with the man who goes by Skinner, was the show's most sustained exploration of two adults who want something from each other and are both somehow in the way of their own getting it. When Marcia Wallace, who gave Edna her voice and her specific quality of presence across decades, passed away, the show retired the character. This decision was itself a statement about the kind of realness Edna had accumulated, an acknowledgement that she had become too specific, too particular, too fully a person to be simply handed to another performer and continued. The character's retirement was a form of honoring the reality that the performance had built. Her death is the most permanently honored female death in the show's history, which is itself interesting given the general pattern of how death operates for female characters in Springfield's world. The women at the margins of Springfield's depicted life are where the pattern becomes most visible in its most complete form. Brandine Spuckler exists almost entirely in relation to her husband and her children and the specific economic circumstances of the Spuckler household. What she wants or thinks or feels independently of those relationships is almost entirely absent from the show's depiction of her. She participates in scenes that use the Spuckler family's situation as material. Between those scenes, she does not appear to have an interior life that the show is interested in exploring. This is a different quality of invisibility from Marge's invisibility. Marge's labor is invisible because it is so effective that it erases the evidence of the person doing it. Brandine's interiority is invisible because the show has simply decided, across 36 years of episodes, that depicting it was not among its priorities. The cumulative pattern across the show's female population is not about any individual character's depiction. It is about the distribution of the show's attention and the direction that distribution flows. The female characters who receive the most sustained depiction are the female characters most closely connected to the central male narrative. The female characters who receive the least are the female characters whose lives do not intersect primarily with the space the show's attention already occupies. This is not a production of malice. It is a production of where the show's focus has always been and how that focus has always been organized, which reflects the specific cultural moment of the show's origin and the specific choices made by specific people in that moment. The show has evolved across 36 years in response to changing cultural context, and the evolution is visible in the female characters who arrived in later seasons and who generally have more developed interiority than those who arrived in the earliest ones. But the through line remains. The women of Springfield are mostly defined by what they endure and how they endure it, and the quality of their endurance is what individuates them rather than any independent direction their lives move in. Lisa is the exception the show has always understood as exceptional. She is the female character the show has developed most fully and most continuously, given the most seriously treated interior life, positioned as the moral center of the narrative in a way that no other female character has occupied. She is the one whose intelligence is treated as genuinely important rather than as one feature among others. She is the one whose desires and values the show consistently takes seriously. And the show has always been clear that Lisa's centrality is unusual, that it is something she has had to establish through the specific quality of what she is, rather than something simply granted to her by her position in the narrative, which is itself a kind of honest statement about the world the show has always been depicting. Section 9. The supporting cast's dark mirrors. What Moe, Lenny, Carl, and Barney reflect. Every significant character in Springfield exists in a particular relationship to Homer Simpson. This is not simply a structural observation about how narratives organize themselves around central characters. It is something more precise and more interesting. The people closest to Homer, the friends and colleagues and the man who pours his beer, each of them illuminates a different facet of what Homer's life might have been, or might yet become, if the specific combination of circumstances that has produced Homer had been different in one or two key ways. They are mirrors, each angled at a different aspect of Homer's story, each showing him something about the roads taken and the roads not taken and the road he is currently on. Barney Gumble is the darkest of these mirrors. Barney was not always what he is. The episode that depicts Homer and Barney's last night before starting college shows you a different person from the one the show has known across all the subsequent episodes. A high-achieving young man with prospects and a future, and the specific confidence that comes from having not yet encountered the thing that will cost you everything. He was going to college. He had a life that extended in a particular direction. Homer gave him a beer on that last night. One beer, offered without malice, without any thought about what it might mean, in the cheerful and unconscious way that Homer offers things. And somewhere in the space between that night and every night that followed, the direction of Barney's life bent, not all at once. Through the mechanics of addiction working on a person who was perhaps particularly susceptible to it, or who found in the relief that the drinking provided something so much more comfortable than the anxiety of having a future, that the comfort gradually became more essential than the future. The adult Barney is the result. He lives at Moe's Tavern in the specific way that people without a place to be live in the places that will have them, with gratitude and with the particular understanding that their presence there is conditional on their continued participation in the thing that makes the place what it is. The show has given Barney recovery storylines across its run. In those episodes, the person visible underneath the alcoholism is recognizably connected to the high-achieving young man of the flashback. There is intelligence there. There is genuine warmth and humor. There is someone capable of engagement with the world and with the people around him in ways that the ordinary Barney does not have access to. The recovery episodes are some of the most hopeful things the show has produced. And then the recovery ends. Barney returns to the bar and to the drinking and to the specific equilibrium that constitutes his daily life. This cycle has been read as the show's failure to let its characters change. But this reading misses what the cycle is actually depicting, which is what recovery is like for most people who need it. Not a single moment of transformation after which everything is different permanently. A sustained, costly, daily process that has to be actively maintained in the right conditions, and that is significantly harder to maintain in some environments than in others. Springfield, and specifically the social world centered on Moe's Tavern, is among the hardest possible environments for maintaining sobriety. The social bonds that constitute Barney's friendship network are built around shared drinking. Homer, whose continued friendship is the most significant relationship in Barney's adult life, organizes his social life around the bar. The people Barney is closest to are the people who are most consistently present in the place he should most consistently not be. Barney's relapses are not simple failures of willpower. They are the outcomes of someone trying to change a fundamental aspect of their behavior while embedded in a social environment that is structured entirely around the behavior they are trying to change. The environment is stronger than the individual intention, not because the individual is weak, but because the environment is pervasive in a way that the intention is not. And Homer, who gave Barney the first beer, is also the person whose continued friendship most consistently places Barney in proximity to the thing the recovery requires distance from. Homer does not think about this. Homer does not organize his behavior around its effects on Barney, because Homer does not organize his behavior around its effects on most things. The effects happen anyway. Lenny and Carl occupy a different position in Homer's mirror system. They are his closest colleagues at the power plant, the people who constitute the texture of his professional daily life across 36 years of shared employment inside the same facility with the same employer. They are Homer with more intact cognition, not different people, not with fundamentally different values or fundamentally different circumstances. The same job, the same employer, the same environmental exposure. The difference is in what that environment has done to them versus what it has done to Homer, which is to say, the difference is in the specific ways the cumulative damage has expressed itself differently in different biological systems. Lenny and Carl navigate the plant and the Springfield social world with a functional competence that the same context has not prevented. They are capable of the kinds of engagements and decisions that Homer's specific cognitive limitations have made unavailable to him. They are, in a meaningful sense, what Homer might have been without the crayon, without the specific accumulation of damage that has shaped him into the Homer the show has always known. Their friendship with Homer is genuine. The show has been consistent about this across hundreds of episodes. They choose his company, they show up for him, they are present for the ordinary texture of male friendship in ways that the friendship genuinely requires. The warmth is real. It is also a friendship between people who are not operating at the same level, in a way that is visible in the accumulated pattern of their interactions. Lenny and Carl can see things about Homer's situation that Homer cannot see about himself. They accommodate what they see rather than confronting it directly, which is itself a specific quality of care, the care that makes allowances rather than demands. The friendship between Lenny and Carl themselves is the most durably warm relationship in Springfield's adult male world. They have chosen each other consistently across decades, in the specific way that adult male friendships that survive the ordinary attrition of time require sustained and active choosing. That sustained choosing, in a town and a show where so much is reset and so many things do not stick, is something genuinely valuable. The show has always treated it with the respect it deserves. Moe Shislak is the most complex of Homer's mirrors, the one whose story has been returned to most often and developed with the most sustained attention. On the surface, Moe is the barkeep, the face across the bar, the constant of Homer's drinking life. In that function, he is Homer's supporting context, rather than the subject of his own story. The show has consistently undermined that surface reading in the episodes that put Moe in the center of the frame. In those episodes, a more complicated and considerably sadder person becomes visible. Moe has ambitions of a specifically modest kind, not the ambitions of someone reaching for large things. The ambitions of someone who has constructed the smallest possible version of the life he wants and keeps finding that even that version exceeds what is available to him. He wants connection. He has a capacity for creativity that surfaces in the episodes where he invents something or pursues some artistic venture. He wants, in the specific and unglamorous way of someone who has been alone for a long time, to be wanted by a specific person, consistently and without condition. The romantic episodes are the ones that most completely show who Moe actually is, because they require the audience to hold simultaneously the comedy of Moe's romantic misadventures, which is genuine and earned, and the genuine sadness of a person who wants something very simple and very human and who cannot get it. Moe knows what his face does to his chances. He is clear-eyed about it in the way that some people develop clarity about the specific ways in which the things they cannot change are costing them. And he is funny about it, which is a specific kind of courage or a specific kind of defense mechanism, and the show has never quite settled on which it is, which is part of what makes Moe the most interesting character in the supporting cast. The bar is where all of these men congregate. It is where Homer brings his enthusiasms and his difficulties, and his disregard for appropriate hours. It is where Barney has organized his entire life around being present. It is where Lenny and Carl decompress from the specific conditions of working inside a facility with 342 safety violations for an employer who does not know their names. Moe's Tavern is the institution in Springfield that makes the fewest pretenses about what it is. The school pretends to be an educational institution while being an inadequately resourced holding pattern. The church pretends to be a place of genuine spiritual community while being, for most of its congregation, a social obligation fulfilled perfunctorily. The government pretends to represent the interests of Springfield citizens while representing primarily the interests of the people who fund its continued operation. The bar does not pretend. It gives people a place to be when being anywhere else requires more than they currently have available. It does not ask them to be better than they are in order to be allowed to stay. It serves beer, and it tolerates the people drinking it, and it closes at whatever hour Moe decides it should close, which is often later than seems quite necessary. In a town full of institutions that serve themselves while presenting as serving the public, the honest simplicity of a bar that honestly just serves beer has a kind of integrity that the more officially important institutions cannot quite match. That is probably not the legacy Moe was aiming for, but it is the one his establishment has accumulated. Section 10. Treehouse of Horror. When the family itself becomes the source of fear. Every October, for 36 years, The Simpsons has stepped outside its own continuity to produce something it can't quite produce inside it. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are officially non-canonical. The deaths don't count. The supernatural premises don't carry forward. The rules of the regular Springfield are suspended for 1 hour of television that exists in its own sealed space, separate from the show's ongoing story, governed only by the logic of whatever this particular season's writers decided to explore. This official separation is supposed to be the mechanism that makes the specials work. Because they are outside continuity, they can go further. They can kill the family. They can destroy the world. They can go to places the regular show's commitment to its ongoing characters won't allow. The non-canonical framing is the permission structure. But here's the thing about the Treehouse of Horror episodes that their reception as beloved holiday entertainment tends to obscure. The most frightening moments across all of them are not the alien invasions, or the supernatural creatures, or the horror movie parodies, or the end-of-the-world scenarios. The most frightening moments are the ones built from the family itself. The segments where the horror is not something arriving from outside the household, but something that was already there, something that belongs to the people on Evergreen Terrace, something that was present in the regular episodes in a different register, and that the Treehouse of Horror format has given permission to appear in its actual shape, Homer as the killer. Not as a joke about Homer's occasional homicidal frustration, but as a sustained premise in which Homer becomes something genuinely dangerous to his family. The family's survival against Homer as threat has appeared across multiple Treehouse segments in forms that range from the explicitly comedic to the genuinely, uncomfortably tense. The family survives. The segment ends. The non-canonical frame holds. But the specific content of what has been depicted, Homer as threat to Marge's life, Homer as threat to the children, Homer's specific combination of physical capability and cognitive disorder directed against the people he loves, does not disappear when the credits roll. It sits in a specific relationship to everything the regular show has built around Homer's relationship to his family. The shinning is the most famous and most analyzed of these segments, and it works in the way it works because the specific dynamic it is distorting was already present in the relationship it is distorting. Homer's isolation from the things that make him functional, his beer, his television, his ordinary texture of daily life, producing in him something increasingly dangerous to the people around him, is not a purely fantastical premise. It is the exaggerated, expressionistically rendered version of something the regular show has depicted in a lower register across its entire run. Homer's functioning depends on specific conditions being met. When those conditions are not met, what Homer becomes is less easy to be around. The Treehouse segments are showing you the shape of that dependency, with the comedy dialed down and the formal elements of horror dialed up. And the reason it is effective as horror is that the underlying dynamic it is working with is real. The Halloween format grants a particular kind of permission to The Simpsons that the regular run cannot grant itself. In the regular run, the show has commitments to these characters, to their ongoing relationships, to the warmth that is genuinely present in the family and that is genuinely part of what the show has always been. In the Treehouse of Horror, those commitments are suspended. And what the suspension reveals across 36 years of October episodes is that the writers have always had thoughts about the darker materials inside the regular show's world. The Treehouse episodes are where those thoughts go when they are ready to be visible in their actual form rather than managed through comedy. The most revealing thing about the Treehouse of Horror episodes is the thing most casually noted about them. The family survives. Segment after segment, year after year, the family is subjected to scenarios designed to destroy it, and the family persists. Even in the segments where individual family members die, the deaths are impermanent in the specifically non-canonical way. By the end of the segment, they are restored. By the next segment, they are entirely intact. The family cannot be destroyed. Not in the Treehouse episodes. Not in the regular episodes. Not across 36 years of scenarios designed with varying degrees of seriousness to test that proposition. This persistence is the show's deepest commitment. Everything else is negotiable. The continuity is negotiable. The characters' histories are negotiable. The rules of Springfield's universe are negotiable. The family on the couch at the end of the episode is not. In that sense, the Treehouse of Horror episodes, far from being outside the show's core project, are its most concentrated expression. They expose the thing to the maximum possible threat and then demonstrate every single October that the thing cannot be destroyed. The horror is the vehicle. The persistence is the point. And the specific content of what the horror is made from, the family's own dynamics, Homer's dependency and its dark potential, the specific pressures that the regular run handles through comedy, tells you that the writers have always understood exactly what they are protecting by insisting on the persistence. They have shown you what it looks like when it fails to be protected. They have shown you Homer with his hands around something more serious than a neck. They have shown you the dark version and then put it away. And then the couch, the family on it, still there. Every treehouse of horror ends with the evidence that the family survived the horror, which in Springfield means the family survived itself. 36 Octobers, 36 survivals, the same result. Section 11. The children of Springfield Elementary what Nelson, Milhouse, Martin, and Ralph are warning you about. The school is where the social reproduction happens. This is a clinical way of saying something that is actually important and often underappreciated. Schools are the primary mechanism through which a society teaches its children who they are going to be in relation to it, what the society values and what it discards, who belongs at the center and who belongs at the margins. This teaching does not happen through explicit instruction. It happens through the accumulated experience of years spent in a building organized around specific assumptions about what matters and what does not, who receives care and who receives indifference, which kinds of intelligence are recognized and which are invisible. Springfield Elementary has been the site of this teaching for 36 years, and the children it has processed through its system tell you a great deal about what Springfield as a social world is actually made of. Milhouse Van Houten is Bart's best friend, and one of the show's most carefully observed portraits of a specific childhood experience that the show depicts honestly. Milhouse is not the kind of child who thrives inside the social ecology of an American elementary school. He is anxious, physically unimposing, emotionally earnest in a register that the social economy of childhood consistently punishes, and in possession of genuine feelings that he does not have either the training or the armor to protect from immediate expression. He is the child who says the honest thing at the wrong moment and then watches the social consequences arrive in real time without having been able to predict them from the honest thing's content. His friendship with Bart is the central organizing fact of his social life, and it is a friendship with a real and genuine component. Bart cares about Milhouse. The show has established this clearly across hundreds of episodes, in the moments where the friendship is tested and the component that is genuine holds. The care is real. The friendship is also organized around a power differential that Milhouse does not fully examine, because examining it would require acknowledging something about Bart that Milhouse's need for the friendship makes it costly to acknowledge directly. Bart is the person Milhouse orbits. Milhouse is not the person Bart orbits. This asymmetry structures the friendship in a specific way that produces regular experiences for Milhouse of being a secondary consideration in situations that feel to him like they should be symmetrical. He accepts this, not because he doesn't notice it, but because the friendship, even organized around this asymmetry, gives him things he cannot access elsewhere. Specifically, it gives him the experience of being chosen by someone whose social position makes the choosing feel like a form of validation. Milhouse's parents' marriage collapses and is restored and collapses again across the show's continuity, and the effect on Milhouse is depicted with unusual care for what the instability of parental relationships does to children. He loves both of his parents. He has no capacity to influence what is happening between them. The instability creates in him an anxiety about permanence that lives in him across all his other relationships, an uncertainty about how long the good things last, and a specific quality of attention to early warning signs that things might be ending. He loves Lisa with a persistence that the show has treated as comedy across its entire run, and it is comedy because of the gap between what Milhouse wants and what Lisa can give him, and the comedy is real. But underneath the comedy, Milhouse's feelings for Lisa are among the most genuinely portrayed feelings in the show's depiction of Springfield's children. He does not simply want to be near her. He wants to be the person she chooses. He wants to be chosen, specifically, by someone whose judgment he trusts enough to believe that being chosen by her would tell him something real about who he is. Nelson Muntz is the show's portrait of what deprivation produces in children when the surrounding institutional world responds to its symptoms rather than its causes. The Nelson the show introduces is defined by the capacities he has developed in the specific environment his life has given him. He is physically capable. He is perceptive in the specific way of children who have had to read rooms quickly for safety. He is willing to use force as a tool in a way that reflects an environment where force has been the most reliably available tool in the situations where he has needed one. The school processes Nelson's behavior as behavioral disruption and responds to it accordingly, with the measures available to institutions addressing behavioral disruption: detention, suspension, the accumulated record of incidents that establishes him as the problem rather than as a person in a specific situation who has developed specific responses to it. What the school does not have adequate resources to address, and what the show depicts honestly in this respect, is the situation that the behavior is a response to. Nelson's home life is not a neutral environment in which he happens to be making aggressive choices. It is an environment characterized by absence and unpredictability and the specific quality of precariousness that produces in children a generalized alertness that looks, from the outside, like aggression but is from the inside, something more like constant preparation for a threat that might arrive from any direction. His mother is intermittently present, and then absent, and then present again. His father is a mystery the show has periodically addressed with varying explanations that have not cohered into a stable answer. The specific pattern of his domestic life has produced specific ways of being in the world that the institutional contexts he moves through interpret as problems to be managed rather than as responses that had a logic in the context that produced them. Nelson is not unkind. The show has established this clearly in the episodes that show him outside the social role he occupies in Springfield Elementary's hierarchy. He has genuine warmth and genuine loyalty available for the people he trusts, which is a small number because trust in his specific experience has proven costly. He is funny in ways that do not require the hierarchical dynamics of the schoolyard. He has qualities that the school's system for sorting children has made almost entirely invisible because those qualities do not fit in the categories the system uses. The ha-ha has become the show's most recognizable single contribution from Nelson's character. His signature response to the misfortunes of others, delivered in the same register regardless of the misfortune's scale or the relationship between Nelson and the person experiencing it. But the show has also given us the episode where the ha-ha breaks, where something happens to Nelson that is large enough that the defensive reflexiveness of his characteristic response cannot cover it. In those moments, what is visible underneath is not the social aggression, but the child who has been managing enormous and largely unsupported pain for a long time. Martin Prince is the academic achiever of the elementary school cohort, the child whose relationship to institutional performance is exactly the one the institution is designed to reward. He studies, he performs, he participates in the activities that earn the institutional markers of success, and he accumulates those markers in a way that should, in theory, produce the benefits that the institution promises its successful participants. What Martin actually receives is more complicated. He receives the grades and the recognition from the institutional hierarchy. He does not receive what the grades and the recognition are supposed to be translating into, which is some form of genuine social inclusion and the specific quality of belonging that sustains a child through the experience of school. The academic performance and the social belonging are supposed to be connected, the performance producing the belonging as a natural consequence. In Martin's case, the performance produces the opposite of belonging. It marks him as different in ways that the social world of Springfield Elementary interprets as reasons for distance rather than for inclusion. The gap between what the institution promises and what it actually delivers to children like Martin is one of the show's most consistently honest observations about how schools work. The institution's hierarchy of value and the peer social world's hierarchy of value are not the same hierarchy. Excellence in the institutional hierarchy can coexist with complete exile from the social one. Martin lives in exactly this space, at the top of one hierarchy and near the bottom of the other, with limited tools for understanding why the gap exists or how to close it. Ralph Wiggum is the most purely strange presence in the children's world of Springfield, and his strangeness is handled by the show with a care that rewards the attention given to it. His sentences do not follow the logical structure of ordinary communication. They arrive from directions that the conventional rules of how sentences work do not explain, and they contain within them an internal logic that is visible if you follow it from inside rather than from the vantage point of the conventional structure they have departed from. The show has made Ralph funny, and the humor is genuine, built on the specific quality of surprise that genuine unexpectedness generates. Ralph says things that you genuinely did not predict. The unpredictability is consistent enough to become a form of pattern, which is itself a specific kind of comedy. But the show has also made him lonely in a way that sits alongside the comedy without being resolved by it. Ralph inhabits a specific social position defined primarily by being outside the social categories that organize the world of Springfield Elementary. He is not excluded in the deliberate way of someone who has been evaluated and found insufficient by the hierarchy. He is excluded in the more fundamental way of someone who is operating in a register the hierarchy does not have categories for. His relationship with Lisa, in the episode that explores it most directly, showed something genuinely moving inside the comedy. Ralph's feelings for Lisa were real feelings, held with genuine intensity and genuine vulnerability. Lisa's response to them was honest and cost her something, because the honesty required her to choose clarity over the social smoothness that sparing Ralph's feelings temporarily would have produced. The episode was built on the genuine difficulty of that choice, and the genuine pain on both sides of it, and the show handled both with uncommon care. Ralph Wiggum says things that should not make sense. Sometimes they land on something true, from a direction that ordinary sense-making would not have approached. This is not accidental. The show has always given Ralph the things to say that none of the other children can say, things that arrive from outside the conventional logic, and that therefore have access to observations that the conventional logic's interior cannot produce. He is the child the system does not know what to do with. In a show that spends a great deal of time examining what the system does with the children it does not know what to do with, that makes him important in a way that the system itself cannot recognize him as. Section 12. The Final Loop, Why Springfield Can Never End, and What That Means for All of Us. We have been walking through Springfield for some time now, through the yellow streets and past the cracked cooling towers, through the elementary school with its inadequate funding and its specific human cost, through Moe's Tavern and the retirement home and the power plant and the church and the houses on Evergreen Terrace, both of them, the one with the yellow family and the one with the neighborly man who has had too much taken from him to have any of it taken notice of. And what we have found, across all of these explorations, is the thing that all the theories and all the observations and all the 36 years of Sunday evening television have been pointing toward without any single episode ever being willing to state it directly. Springfield is not a place that can end because the ending of Springfield would require admitting something about the audience that the audience has not been asked to confront. Let us walk through this carefully, because it deserves care. Every theory we have explored tonight arrives at the same observation from a different direction. The radiation theory says the characters cannot age because their cellular biology has been altered by sustained exposure to nuclear contamination. The coma theory says they cannot age because they exist inside the frozen consciousness of a man whose dreaming mind cannot update a world he is no longer present in to watch change. The Skinner episode's theory about Springfield's relationship to collective truth says they cannot age because the town has a social contract that specifically prohibits the acknowledgement of certain categories of change. The Burns immortality theory says that aging itself is a negotiable condition in Springfield's universe, something that can be circumvented through sufficient resources and sufficiently specialized medical technology. Every theory is different. Every theory's proposed mechanism is different. But every theory converges on the same fact, which is simply this. The characters do not age. Bart is 10, Lisa is 8. Homer is somewhere in his mid-30s. Marge is somewhere in her mid-30s. Maggie has been holding a pacifier for 36 years. And this fact is the show's most fundamental and most revealing characteristic, the one that contains inside it, if you look at it long enough, everything the show is actually about. Consider what aging means in the context of the Simpson family specifically. If Bart ages, he leaves the specific developmental phase that makes his character what it is. He enters adolescence, which has a different relationship to rule following, and to the performance of defiance, and to the specific quality of bond with his father that the show has always built around the particular dynamic of a 10-year-old and a man-child. The Bart who has passed through adolescence is not the Bart who exists in the perpetual present of Springfield. He is someone related to that Bart who has moved past what that Bart is. If Lisa ages, She moves closer to the departure that is always implicit in her story, the leaving of Springfield that her intelligence and her ambitions make inevitable, that the flash-forward episodes confirm will happen, and that cannot happen within the ongoing run of the show because it would require the show to acknowledge that Springfield is a place people leave rather than a place that contains all the life that matters. If Maggie ages, she begins to speak and to walk and to become the specific, extraordinary person that the hints the show has dropped across 36 years suggest she would become. She stops being the silent watcher and starts being someone who acts with the full range of her capabilities in ways that would require the show to reckon with what she has been building in the silence. If Homer and Marge age, they begin to face the specific things that aging brings to a marriage of their specific quality. The questions that become available to a couple as their children grow up and leave, and the two people who built a family together are left in a house that was organized around the family and must now find a new organization. These are not simple things. They are among the most complex and most important things that people navigate, and the show has never been equipped to let Homer and Marge navigate them, because navigating them requires time to pass, and time passing is the thing Springfield will not allow. So the loop holds. And here is the thing about the loop that we have been circling without naming. The loop does not hold because the writers cannot figure out how to let the characters age. Animated shows can age their characters when they choose to. It is technically possible, as the show has demonstrated in the flash-forward episodes that show us adult Lisa and adult Bart and the whole family in a future tense that the show regularly visits and equally regularly refuses to inhabit. The characters do not age because aging is not what the show is for. What the show is for is something different, something that has been present since the first episode and that every subsequent episode has maintained and reinforced. Think about the moment when you first watched The Simpsons. Not necessarily the first episode you remember, the first moment when the show felt like something real to you, something that was giving you something you actually needed. Think about where you were and what was going on in your life and what the show was providing in relation to what was going on. For a significant portion of the show's audience, for the people who were young during the show's golden age and who have carried it with them since, the Simpson family represents something that has no direct replacement in adult life. It represents a version of the domestic world in which things are consistently difficult and consistently funny and consistently redeemable. In which the catastrophes of Wednesday are indistinguishable from the catastrophes of every other Wednesday. In which the family absorbs everything the world throws at it and reconstitutes itself on the couch by the episode's end. Intact, together, ready for whatever next week brings. This is not a realistic description of how family life works. The show has always known this and has always embedded enough honesty about the cost of Homer and Marge's specific versions of love and damage and accommodation to prevent the sentimentality from being simple. But the fantasy underneath the honesty is real, and it serves real needs in the people who watch it. The fantasy is this, that the family holds, that whatever happens, the couch at the end of the week has everyone on it. That the love between these specific people is more durable than any of the forces that test it. That home is a place you can return to and find it the same, find it holding, find the people in it not yet changed beyond recognition or departed beyond reach. This fantasy is most powerful for the people who cannot access it in their own lives, for the people whose families did not hold or held in ways that required enormous and sometimes unbearable cost, or held and then released at moments that the people inside them were not prepared for. For those people, the Simpson family on their permanent couch, in their permanent house, on their permanent street, is something that the word escapism does not quite capture, because escapism implies something frivolous, and this is not frivolous. It is the thing you go to when the real thing is unavailable or insufficient or gone. And the show cannot end, because ending would mean acknowledging that this resource, this permanent present tense where the family is always together and the beer is always cold and Sunday night always comes around again, is finite, is temporary, is the kind of thing that can be there and then not be there. The show's refusal to age its characters is the show's deepest form of care for its audience, not care in the production sense, not the show doing the audience a favor by keeping the status quo comfortable. Care in the sense that something important has been identified as worth protecting, and an enormous sustained effort has been made to protect it. The loop is not a prison. Or it is a prison, But it is the kind of prison that someone built for themselves, because the alternative was a freedom that cost more than they could afford. Homer, in the coma theory, chose the dream over the waking. The show chose the permanent present over the timeline that would let things end. The audience chose to keep watching for 36 years. The same family in the same house on the same impossible street. Every choice was made for the same reason. Because what is being protected inside the loop is worth the cost of the loop. Because the family on the couch, frozen at whatever ages they have been for the entirety of the show's run, represents something that the world outside Springfield cannot reliably provide. The hope that home is permanent. The hope that the people you love will still be there next Sunday. The hope that whatever happened this week, whatever the episode contained, the credits will roll and the reset will happen and the family will be intact and it will start again. Section 13. What Burns has always known that Springfield cannot afford to understand. Return, one final time, to the man at the top of the structure. Charles Montgomery Burns has been examined across 36 seasons as villain, as comedy figure, as embodiment of monopoly capitalism's most absurdist extreme, as the show's concentrated portrait of what unchecked accumulation of wealth and power does to the person who conducts that accumulation across a span of time that would have consumed anyone with less insulation between themselves and consequence. What has been examined less, and what deserves attention as we approach the end of this particular walk through Springfield, is what Burns understands that the show's other characters do not. Burns understands the system. Not in the abstract sense, not as a thing he can articulate as a theory, in the immediate and practical sense of someone who built the system and who therefore knows its components and its connections and the specific pressures that keep each part of it in its particular position relative to all the other parts. He knows that Homer's continued employment is the facility's most effective defense against regulatory consequence. He knows that the medical establishment in Springfield cannot afford to find things it should not find. He knows that the political structure will align with his economic interests, not because he has explicitly purchased it, though the explicit purchase also occurs, but because the alignment is the natural equilibrium of an environment in which his economic dominance has been the organizing condition for over a century. He knows that the people of Springfield cannot organize an effective challenge to his position not because they are individually powerless, though they are, but because the specific conditions of their lives, the cognitive damage and the economic dependency, and the particular quality of civic culture that a town governed by one man for a century tends to produce, make effective collective action extremely difficult to sustain across the period needed to actually change anything. He knows these things because he arranged them, not in a single deliberate act of planning, but through the accumulated decisions of a century of operating in a specific way in a specific place. The arrangement is not a conspiracy in the theatrical sense. It is more like an ecological outcome, the predictable result of the specific forces he has brought to bear on the specific environment of Springfield over a very long time. And here is what Burns understands about the sustainability of this arrangement that makes him genuinely frightening in a way that goes beyond the comedy that coats his every episode. He understands that it sustains itself, that the system he has assembled does not require his active management of each component because the components have been organized into relationships with each other that maintain the overall structure without requiring him to intervene in every specific interaction. He has built a self-maintaining system. His own immortality, the artificial perpetuation of his life through the medical technology his wealth provides, is simply the final component of a system that was already designed around the perpetuation of the arrangement that makes his wealth possible. The arrangement perpetuates Burns. Burns perpetuates the arrangement. The loop is closed. Springfield cannot afford to understand this, in the precise sense. The economic cost of understanding it and acting on that understanding is more than the town can pay. Challenging Burns means disrupting the economic foundation that Springfield's basic functioning depends on. The price of the truth is higher than the price of the comfortable arrangement that the truth would disrupt. So the town does not understand it. Not because the town is stupid, though the cumulative effects of chronic environmental contamination have not made critical thinking easier for the people living inside the contamination zone. Because understanding it and then having to act on the understanding would require the town to pay a price that the town is not equipped to pay. This is the specific and devastating thing the show has been depicting since its earliest seasons. Not a simple villain in a simple story. A system that serves the interests of its architect at the expense of everyone else inside it, and that is self-perpetuating precisely because the cost of disrupting it is higher than any of the people who would bear the disruption's consequences are positioned to absorb. Burns wins. The show has established this clearly across its entire run. Not in every individual episode, Burns loses individual episodes with some regularity, but structurally, at the level of the arrangement rather than the level of the joke, Burns wins. He has always been winning. He was winning before the show began, and he will be winning when it eventually ends, if it ends. And the people of Springfield go to work every morning in a facility that is poisoning them, and come home to houses powered by the electricity that poisoning provides, and drink the water that carries the evidence of it, and vote for the politicians whose continued position depends on the arrangement, and forget the catastrophes that should have changed everything, because the forgetting is what the arrangement requires of them. And the sun comes up over Springfield, and the cooling towers let their clouds of steam into the air, and the three-eyed fish swim in the river downstream, and the children on the way to school walk past the chain-link fence at the edge of the plant's property, and none of them look up at the thing that defines them in ways they cannot see because they are inside it. This is the show's thesis. Assembled across 36 seasons of jokes and near misses and couch gags and reset buttons, delivered not in any single episode but in the accumulated weight of all of them. A town can be organized around the needs of its most powerful residents so completely and so durably that the organization becomes invisible, becomes the texture of how things are, becomes, over time, the thing the town protects most fiercely, because it is the only arrangement the town has ever known, and the alternative has been made sufficiently costly to imagine that, imagining it feels more dangerous than the arrangement itself. Springfield is not a critique of any specific time or political moment. It is a critique of a condition that human communities seem to produce with some regularity across different times and different specific arrangements. The condition of a population that has been organized, over time, around the service of interests that are not their own and that has lost, through that organization, the specific capacities that would be required to change the arrangement. The show has been running this critique quietly, for 36 years, inside the wrapper of one of the most beloved family comedies in the history of American television. The joke has always been on Springfield. The deeper joke, the one the show has been building toward since 1989, is that Springfield looks a great deal like everywhere else. Section 14. Mona Simpson and the 3 generations she broke without meaning to. There is a question that the show almost never asks directly and that almost never gets asked about the show, and it is the question of what Mona Simpson wanted. Not what she did, though what she did is canonical and has been explored in the episodes the show gave her across her intermittent appearances. What she wanted from her life before the sequence of events that transformed her from a suburban housewife into a decades-long fugitive. What she was building toward, what her expectations were, what the daily life she was living in Springfield before 1969 contained in the way of aspiration and private ambition, and the particular texture of interiority that defines a person when they are not being defined by their role in someone else's story. The show gives her almost nothing in this register, which is itself a form of information. She is introduced, in the episode that reveals her existence, primarily as the answer to a mystery that is organized around Homer. Why is his mother absent? What happened to her? What it means for Homer that she is alive? She is defined from the moment of her introduction by what she is in relation to him. This is not an accident of careless characterization. The show is precise enough in the episodes it cares about to distinguish careless characterization from structural choices. The relative absence of Mona's interiority is a structural choice. It mirrors, in miniature, the way that the entire architecture of the damage she leaves behind has always been organized around its effects on the men in her story, rather than around the experience of the person at the center of it. Consider what Mona actually did and what happened as a consequence. She was radicalized through proximity to a political movement that she found morally urgent. This is depicted in the show with characteristic lightness. the specific hippie encoding that the show's satirical vocabulary reaches for when depicting late 1960s political activism. But the cause itself, the destruction of a biological weapons laboratory operating in the middle of a residential community, is not a frivolous cause given any moral weight to it. Burns was manufacturing biological weapons in Springfield. If Mona had not acted against that facility, those weapons would have continued being developed there, in proximity to the population they were potentially designed to harm. She made a tactical error in the process of that action. She stopped to help an injured person. That person was Burns. He identified her. The consequences of that moment spread through 3 generations of her family across the remainder of the show's run. Mona spent 27 years underground, separated from her husband, from her son, from the ordinary life she had been constructing before, the night she stopped to help someone who then used her identification to destroy the life she was stopping to help him from endangering. Homer spent 27 years believing his mother was dead, believing he had been abandoned. Constructing, from the absence that Abe explained as death rather than as flight, a theory of himself as someone whose mother would have preferred to die than to raise him. This theory became the substructure of his emotional life, the thing that his relentless need for love and approval and the specific quality of his terror of abandonment all grew out of. And Abe, Homer's father, dealt with the loss of his wife by covering it with a lie he told his son, a lie that served Abe's own need to manage the unbearable quality of the truth that she was not dead but had left, because staying would have endangered them by converting it into a grief that Homer could process as something finished rather than something ongoing. The lie was a form of protection. It was also a profound damage to Homer's ability to understand his own emotional history. When the truth finally emerged, in the Season 7 episode, the reunion scene carries more emotional weight than almost anything else the show has produced across its entire run, because it is not simply the reunion of a man and a woman who have not seen each other for 27 years. It is the moment when Homer discovers that the entire foundational structure of his emotional life, the belief that he was abandoned, the belief that his mother chose not to be present for his childhood, is false. She did not choose to be absent. She was forced to be absent by the man who would later employ Homer, by the man whose facility Homer has spent his adult life inside, by the man whose continued operation of that facility is the primary context of Homer's professional existence. Homer is employed by the person who destroyed his family. He does not connect these facts in any sustained or actionable way. The show has established that Homer's cognitive limitations prevent the kind of systemic thinking that making this connection in a meaningful way would require. He can know the facts individually, and he does know them after the reunion episode, but organizing them into a coherent understanding of the relationship between them, and between that understanding and the choices available to him about how to respond to it, exceeds what his damaged cognition can produce. This is one of the most devastating things the show has ever done, and it does it so quietly and across such a long span of time that its full weight becomes visible only in retrospect. Burns broke Homer's mother in 1969. Homer was born into the consequences of that breaking in a year before the show begins. Homer grew up inside those consequences without knowing they were consequences, believing instead that they were simply how things were, the specific shape of the life he had been given. Homer became the person those consequences produced, with the specific emotional damage and the specific cognitive limitations and the specific desperation for love that they generated. Homer ended up employed by the person who initiated the chain of events that produced him. Burns knows this. The show has established that Burns recognizes Mona when she returns to Springfield in the Season 7 episode. He spots her. He calls the FBI. He reinitiates the mechanism that drove her underground the first time. He forces Homer to say goodbye to his mother for the second time. Burns forces Homer to lose his mother twice. And then Homer goes back to work at the plant. The deal with Abe is the final layer of this. Burns committed something at some point that Abe witnessed. Abe had leverage. In exchange for Abe's silence about whatever Burns had done, Burns guaranteed Homer's permanent employment, irrespective of performance, irrespective of competence, irrespective of the 742 documented errors that should have ended any ordinary employment relationship many times over. Homer's job security, which the show has played across its run as a comedic feature of his impossible luck, is the contractual residue of a private arrangement between his father and the person who destroyed his family. He has been employed his entire adult life under a guarantee that originated in silence about wrongdoing by the man who forced his mother to disappear. Every paycheck Homer has ever received from the plant is the dividend of his father's silence about Burns's crime. Homer will never know this. Knowing it would require being told it by someone who knows it, in terms simple enough for his particular cognition to organize into the understanding that the information merits. Abe is the person who knows it, and Abe is not going to tell it, because telling it would require excavating a history that Abe has spent decades burying under other things. The story of Mona Simpson is the story of 3 generations of Simpsons, shaped by a single act of institutional retribution by a single powerful man who continued operating while the consequences of what he did to that family accumulated across decades without his having to account for any of it. This is not a satire of anything specific. It is a portrait of something so generalized in how power operates that it does not need to be specific to be accurate. The retributive application of institutional power against individuals who challenge it. The long-term damage to families that a single act of that power can initiate and sustain across generations without the person who initiated it ever having to see the full extent of what their action produced. Burns saw Mona's face in 1969 and made a phone call. Everything after that was the echo. Section 15. Springfield After Dark. What the town looks like when nobody is watching. There is a version of Springfield that the show only shows you in fragments, in the episodes where something is happening after the ordinary hours, when the daytime social performance of the town has shut down, and whatever Springfield actually is underneath the performance is briefly visible. Moe's Tavern at 2 in the morning is a different establishment from Moe's Tavern at 7 in the evening. The people in it at 2 are in it for different reasons. The social lubrication has moved past lubrication into something more fundamental, something that has to do with the specific quality of company that late hours in a bar provide to people for whom other options are not readily available. The conversation has changed. The stakes of the conversation have changed, in both directions, sometimes toward greater honesty than the daytime hours allow, and sometimes toward the kind of incautious disclosure that the next morning tends to regret. Homer's bar presence at 2 in the morning is different from his bar presence at 5 in the afternoon. At 5 in the afternoon, he is celebrating the completion of a workday, or recovering from a specific episode's catastrophe, or participating in the kind of social ritual that the bar is the venue for in the social economy of Springfield. At 2 in the morning, he is doing something else, something the show has depicted across its run in episodes where the plot requires a late hour, something that has more to do with the specific quality of the quiet in his house when everyone else is asleep, and the specific quality of the noise in the bar that fills the quiet with something external. There is a version of Homer that only exists at 2 in the morning. The show has shown it to you in the episodes that allow it. He talks differently. He is more honest, in the unguarded way of someone who has been drinking and whose defenses have softened to the point where the gap between what he is thinking and what he says has narrowed. He says things about his life that he would not say at 5 in the afternoon, things about the marriage and about his children and about the plant, and about the specific quality of his days that the daytime Homer manages through comedy and deflection, but that the 2 in the morning Homer cannot quite sustain the management of. You hear in those moments who Homer is when the performance is not available to him? The rest of Springfield at late hours has a similar quality of revealed texture. The people who are awake at unusual hours in Springfield are the people for whom the ordinary schedule of Springfield life does not provide what it is supposed to provide. The night shift at the plant, working in the specific and differently terrible way that night shift industrial work is terrible, with the fatigue and the reduced oversight and the specific character of work conducted without the social fabric that the daytime hours provide. The people who cannot sleep, for reasons the show has occasionally explored and more often left in the background of scenes that happen to take place in the middle of the night. The retirement home at night has been the setting of some of the show's most quietly affecting material. Grandpa Simpson, in his institutional setting, in the hours when the activity programs have concluded and the daytime visitors have gone home, and what remains is the specific and largely undocumented texture of being old in a place that has organized itself around your maintenance, rather than your fulfillment. The nights at the retirement home are long in a way that the show has occasionally been willing to show, and that the willingness to show is itself significant. The show mostly takes place during the day, during the episode's business hours, when the official version of Springfield is performing its function. The late-night Springfield that surfaces in fragments across the show's run is the evidence that the official version is incomplete. That there are hours and spaces in the town where the performance is not occurring because there is no audience for the performance, and in those hours and spaces, Springfield looks different. More honest, in some ways, more clearly itself, more visibly built from the specific materials of ordinary human difficulty that the comedy of the daytime hours manages through the particular mechanisms the show has always used to make those difficulties bearable to look at. Directly, the 3 in the morning phone call has appeared in multiple episodes, as a plot device and as a texture note. The specific hour of 3 in the morning is when the thing that has been managed through the day's activity becomes temporarily unmanageable. The crisis that the structure of the day has been keeping at a certain distance arrives in the specific quiet of 3 in the morning when the structures are not operating. The phone rings. Homer answers. Something has happened or someone needs something that the daytime's resources are not available to provide. These moments are when the show is most directly about what it is most fundamentally about, which is the specific effort required to hold things together and the specific moments when that effort is not quite enough. They are the cracks in the structure through which the more difficult material becomes visible. And the show has always known when to let you see them and when to let the daytime's comedy return and cover them back over. Springfield After Dark is Springfield without its management layer, without the comedy that makes the difficulties manageable at a distance, without the institutional structures that organize the difficulty into categories that can be addressed. What remains when those things are not operating is something the show has been honest about in fragments across 36 years. People who are trying, people who are not quite managing, people who love their families and are afraid for their families and do not always have available what their families need, people who drink too much because drinking is what is available when what they need is not. People who lie awake worrying about things that the daytime hours do not have adequate containers for. People who love someone and cannot figure out how to tell them in a way that the someone can actually receive. Springfield at 3 in the morning is a town of people who are doing the best they can with what they have. The daytime Springfield, with its comedic register and its safety violations, and its billionaire schemes, and its catastrophes that reset by next week, is built on top of that foundation. It is worth knowing that the foundation is there. Section 16. The Babies of Springfield Maggie and What Her Silence Knows. Everything significant about Maggie Simpson is present in a single gesture that the show has returned to more than once across its run. She looks around to make sure she is not being observed. She confirms that nobody is watching. And then she does the thing that she would not do in company. This gesture, available to someone who cannot yet speak and cannot yet reliably walk, and who exists in the social category of infant, a category premised on the assumption of complete dependency and complete transparency. This gesture requires a specific set of cognitive capacities that the social category of infant is not supposed to contain. Situational awareness, the ability to model other people's attention and determine its direction, the understanding that observation has consequences, the understanding that certain behaviors are better performed in private. These capacities are not incidental features of Maggie's characterization. They are its foundation. The show has built Maggie's presence in the narrative around the gap between what she is assumed to be, which is an infant and therefore fundamentally unknowing, and what she actually is, which the show has indicated through accumulated evidence to be something far more developed than the assumption allows for. The shooting of Mr. Burns is the act that defined her public identity within the show's universe, and it is worth examining what the act actually required in the way of cognitive equipment, independent of any theory about whether it was intentional or accidental. Burns encountered Maggie in a parking lot. He attempted to take her lollipop. His gun, which had already been observed as missing from its holster before the shooting occurred, was involved in the encounter in a way that resulted in Burns being shot. If the encounter happened as Burns describes it in his testimony, then the gun fell from his possession and Maggie picked it up and it discharged. In this version, the shooting is an accident involving an infant who does not understand what she is holding. If the shooting was not accidental, if Maggie recognized Burns and had access to some understanding of what Burns represented that caused her to act intentionally, Then the act required something that no ordinary infant possesses: recognition of a specific individual outside her immediate family, understanding that this individual was a source of harm to people she cared about, the decision to use an available weapon against that individual, the physical capability to operate a firearm. Most of these capacities are impossible for an ordinary one-year-old to possess, but Maggie has never been an ordinary one-year-old. The Academy Award-nominated short film places her in a scenario that requires her to demonstrate, in sequence, spatial awareness, threat assessment, planning, improvisation, multi-step strategy execution, and the ability to predict and account for the behavior of other people. She accomplishes all of it without speaking, without walking in a way that reliably maintains upright posture, in a body that is genuinely one-year-old in its motor development, even if it is housing something considerably more advanced in its cognitive development. This gap between cognitive capacity and physical capacity is the specific quality of Maggie's situation that makes her story the most unusual in the Simpson family. The other family members' limitations are matched by their capacities in ways that produce internally consistent people, even where those people are damaged or constrained. Homer's cognitive limitation is matched by a physical capability that is itself unusual, but that operates in the same scale as his cognitive limitations: large, undirected, capable of enormous effect in ways that the person directing it cannot reliably predict or control. Maggie's cognitive capability operates in an entirely different register from her physical capability. Her body is genuinely limited in the ways that one-year-old bodies are genuinely limited. Her mind is doing something that the body cannot keep up with. The intelligence trapped in an infant's motor development is the specific shape of her situation, and it is a shape that the show has found consistently productive because the gap between the container and the contents is the central dramatic tension of her character. Why does she not speak? This is the question the show has built its longest-running mystery around. Not who shot Mr. Burns, though that is the famous one. The deeper mystery is why a being of Maggie's apparent intelligence has maintained, for 36 years, a silence that her intelligence clearly does not require. The answer the show most consistently implies is that the silence is chosen. That Maggie has observed the consequences of being publicly intelligent in the specific environment of the Simpson family and has made a strategic decision that the consequences do not favor disclosure. The evidence for this theory is Lisa. Maggie has watched her sister for her entire life. She has watched Lisa be brilliant, articulate her intelligence, use it in public and in family contexts, direct it at the problems and injustices she encounters. And she has watched what the public intelligence costs Lisa: the isolation, the dismissal, the specific quality of loneliness that accompanies being the most cognitively capable person in most of your rooms, and having that capability be not a bridge to the people around you, but a distance maker. Lisa's intelligence is her most visible quality, and it is the quality that most consistently marks her as separate from the world she inhabits. Her separation is real. Her loneliness is real. Her continued attempt to use her intelligence in service of the people and causes she cares about is genuinely admirable and genuinely costly. Maggie watched this, and Maggie concluded, apparently, that the cost was too high for the return that Lisa's model of visible intelligence produced. The silence is the alternative strategy, not the absence of intelligence, it's concealment. The deployment of the appearance of ordinary infancy as a cover for cognitive capacities that the appearance would not lead anyone to expect or monitor for. She can observe everything because no one adjusts their behavior around the expectation that the baby is understanding what they are doing and why they are doing it. She can process everything. She can form conclusions. She can wait. Wait for what? The show does not say. 36 years of silence, and the show has not told us what Maggie is waiting for. But the pattern of what she has demonstrated she is capable of, across the episodes that have shown her capacity directly, suggests that the waiting is purposeful, that there is a threshold, that when the conditions are right, or when the situation requires it, Maggie will act. She has acted before. The acts she has produced have been significant and have accomplished what she appeared to intend. She checked to make sure no one was watching, and then she moved her pacifier in the shape of pulling a trigger. She knew what she had done. She knew why she had done it. She knew that others were not supposed to know that she knew. And she has maintained the performance of not knowing, in public, for 36 years. That is either the most sophisticated strategic intelligence in Springfield, or the most patient exercise of it, or both. Section 17. The Homer nobody sees what happens between the episodes. Every episode of The Simpsons has a before and an after that the episode itself does not contain. The situation the episode depicts arrives at a starting point, determined by the episode's requirements, and concludes at an ending point designed to return the characters to something approximating their default state, ready for the next episode to begin from the same approximate place. What happens between episodes is a topic the show generally declines to address, for the structural reason that addressing it would require either maintaining continuity in a way that the floating timeline makes impossible, or acknowledging the gap in a way that breaks the show's careful management of its own rules. But if you look at what the show has established about the people inside it, you can make reasonable inferences about what the between episodes time contains for the people living it. Homer goes to work every weekday morning. He drives the same route in the same car, past the same landmarks of Springfield, to the same facility where the same employer operates in the same way that he has always operated. He arrives at his workstation and he sits down. The monitoring equipment that surrounds his workstation is real equipment with real readouts that Homer has never been established as capable of interpreting reliably. He sits inside the facility and he performs, to the degree he is capable of performing, the function that his job title designates him for, and the performance is insufficient by any standard that would actually matter if anyone were checking whether it was sufficient. He does this every day. He has been doing it for his entire adult life. And the show, across all 36 seasons and all the episode plots that have taken Homer away from this routine in favor of adventure or catastrophe or whatever the specific episode's premise requires, has always returned him to it by the next episode, because the routine is what Homer's life actually consists of between the episodes. Think about what that daily repetition accumulates to. 36 years of mornings where Homer wakes up and goes to a job that does not engage any of his capacities in ways that produce growth or development or the specific sense of purpose that work is theoretically supposed to generate. When it is organized around what the person doing it is, capable of contributing. He sits at his workstation and performs a monitoring function he is not equipped to perform in a facility that operates in the knowledge that the monitoring is insufficient for an employer who has structured the insufficiency as a feature rather than a failure. What does Homer think about during those workdays? The episodes give you moments, comedy beats built around his capacity to generate elaborate fantasies from minimal external stimulation, to fall asleep in the middle of a technical process, to be distracted from his monitoring responsibilities by the immediate availability of a donut. But these are the high points, the moments in the daily texture that are interesting enough to constitute episode material. The low points of the daily texture are the stretches between those moments, the quiet periods when the monitoring equipment is doing whatever it does and Homer is present in the room with it, and neither Homer nor the equipment is actively generating an anecdote. Those stretches are the largest portion of his working day. They are also the stretches the show never depicts. What does Homer do in those stretches? What does a man with Homer's specific combination of cognitive limitation and genuine emotional depth do with the hours that the workday's requirement of presence, but not competence, produces? The show tells you he sleeps, he eats, he sometimes dreams. What the dreams contain, across the workday stretches that are not eventful enough to constitute episode plots, is something the show has not addressed. But the emotional reality of those stretches is visible and negative, from the shape of Homer in the episodes that do show you his interiority directly. Homer is someone who experiences his life primarily through love. The intellectual register that other characters use to engage with their experience is largely unavailable to him, not because he has no intellectual register, but because his access to it is so constrained by the accumulated damage of his specific history that it cannot function as the primary mode of engagement the way it does for characters with more intact cognition. What is available to Homer, consistently and deeply, is his emotional life. The love he has for his family, which is enormous. The fear of losing what he loves, which is persistent. The specific quality of warmth he experiences in the presence of the people who constitute his world. The workday, in the in-between spaces, is where Homer exists without the people who make the emotional register available to him. Marge is at home. The children are at school, Barney is at the bar, which is a different location from the plant. The workday is populated primarily by the facility itself, which does not love Homer back, and by the employer who cannot reliably remember his name. Homer manages this. He has been managing it for his entire adult life. The management strategies are the things the show renders as comedy: the snacking, the sleeping, the elaborate distractions that break the workday's tedium into smaller pieces. But the thing being managed is not trivial. It is the daily experience of spending the majority of one's waking hours in a context organized entirely around what you are incapable of, surrounded by people who range from indifferent to actively contemptuous of your presence, performing a function that you know, on some level that is too deep for you to fully articulate but not too deep to feel, you are not actually performing. The workday, for Homer, is where the theory of himself that his emotional life sustains comes into its most sustained contact with the reality that contradicts it. He goes home and he is loved and the family is there and the love is real, and the reality confirms something about who he is that feels true. He goes to work, and the reality of the work contradicts that feeling in ways that the comedy of the show manages, but that the life inside the show does not. Every weekday, for 36 years, the same drive, the same workstation, the same equipment, the same employer who cannot remember his name, and every evening, the same drive home, the same house, the same family. The evening is what makes the workday bearable. The workday is what makes the evening necessary. Between the episodes, this is what Homer's life consists of. And across 36 years of it, the accumulated weight of those workdays and those evenings, the sustained cycle of going and returning, of the inadequacy of the work and the sufficiency of the family, has produced the specific person that the episodes, in their concentrated and comedic form, present. The Homer between the episodes is the Homer the show is actually about. The episodes are just the interesting parts. Section 18. Springfield's forgotten the people the show never followed home. Every crowd scene in Springfield contains people the show will never follow. This is true of all serialized fiction, which requires background population to feel like a world rather than a stage set with principal actors, and which achieves that background population through characters who exist in the periphery of the frame, contributing texture without receiving story. The people at the town meeting who are not Homer or Marge or Ned or Apu, the people on the street that the main characters walk past, the people in the background of the diner when the plot's characters are at the table in the foreground. Most serialized fiction creates this background population and then leaves it there in the background because that is its function. Springfield's background population has accumulated enough appearances across 36 years that some of them have become recognizable, identifiable, carrying their own histories of appearances without being given the sustained narrative attention that would make those histories into stories. Hans Moleman, the two-line character who has been killed so many times in the background of other people's episodes that his mortality has become a running observation. But who is he when he is not being crushed or incinerated or eaten? Where does he go when the episode concludes and the frame closes? What does a 31-year-old man who appears to be in his 80s, who has died and returned so many times that death itself seems to have become a temporary condition for him, do on a Tuesday afternoon when Springfield's main characters are all occupied in whatever their episode's premise requires? The show cannot answer this. The show was not built to answer it. Its storytelling infrastructure is organized around the Simpson family and the characters in close enough orbit to that family to participate in the family's stories. Moleman's orbit is too distant for regular access. But the question of what his life contains, outside the deaths, is worth asking because the answer to it is the answer to what a large portion of Springfield's population contains in the hours between the episode's coverage. They live in the same town. They drink the same water. They breathe the same air. They were present for the same catastrophes and the same resets and the same three-eyed fish and the same dome over the town. They carry the same yellow skin from the same source. And the show has never followed them home. The retirement home is one of the places the show visits periodically and then leaves. Grandpa Simpson's life there has been depicted in episodes centered on his relationship with Homer, his relationship with his own past, the specific institutional quality of the facility, but the retirement home also contains other people, People who are not Grandpa Simpson and who therefore have no avenue into the Simpson family's story and therefore have no episodes built around their experience. What is the retirement home like for the people who are not Grandpa Simpson? The show gives you the texture of it in the background of the Grandpa episodes, the specific quality of institutional time, the organized activities that are organized around the assumption that organized activities are what the people in the facility most need, which is sometimes true and is also sometimes a means of filling hours, in a way that provides the facility with a visible program rather than with a genuine response to what its residents are experiencing. The people in those background shots of the retirement home have been old in Springfield for the same duration that the main characters have been their ages. They have been sitting in those chairs and attending those activities and watching the same Springfield television and living inside the institutional routine for 36 years of the show's time. The show's commitment to a frozen timeline means they have not aged. They are, in the show's present, the same age they were in 1989. But their presence in the retirement home is the evidence that Springfield has an elderly population with a retired from active life quality to it that the show depicts in its background and attends to in its Grandpa episodes, and otherwise does not follow. The children of Springfield, who are not the Simpson children or their close school associates, have the same quality of being there without being followed. There are hundreds of them. They attend Springfield Elementary. They have parents and homes and the specific experiences of Springfield childhood that the show has depicted through the lens of Bart and Lisa and their immediate social orbits. What their childhoods contain, from inside those childhoods rather than from the periphery of the Simpsons story, is something the show cannot give you because the show was not built to give it. What this means, in the aggregate, is that Springfield has a population density that the show's storytelling can only partially address. The Springfield that exists in all the moments the camera is not present, across all the locations that the episode plots do not require, contains a version of whatever Springfield is that is complete and fully inhabited and fully experiencing the specific conditions of Springfield life without ever being shown to us. The yellow skin is on all of them. The same plant is their plant. The same water is their water. The same Burns is their employer, or their neighbor's employer, or their family's economic context. They attended the same town meetings and voted or did not vote and watched the same local news and drove past the same cooling towers. The town is full of people the show never followed home. Their lives are there. Their damage is there. Their love for whoever they love and their fear of whatever they fear, and the specific quality of their Tuesday afternoons in a contaminated town where the most powerful man in their history has organized everything around his own. Survival. The show has given you The Simpsons. It has implied, through the crowd scenes and the background shots and the passing appearances of the characters who are there but not followed, that The Simpsons are surrounded by an entire population of people who are experiencing their own versions of what The Simpsons are experiencing. That population is the evidence that what the show is depicting is not a specific family's specific story. It is a town story, with one family in the foreground. Section 9:18. What the opening credits have always been telling you. The opening credits of The Simpsons are the most analyzed 30 seconds in American television history. They have been taken apart, reconstructed, annotated, indexed, and discussed in forms ranging from academic essays to internet forums to casual conversation between people who have watched the show long enough to notice that certain elements change between seasons while others remain constant. The basic structure is known to anyone who has watched the show more than a handful of times. It begins with the show's title emerging from clouds. It moves through Springfield in a sequence of vignettes depicting the family members going through their day, converging ultimately at the house, and ending with the couch gag, which is the element that changes most frequently and that the show has used across its run as the site of its most experimental and most self-referential humor. But the structure of the opening credits, beyond the couch gag's known variability, is itself an argument about the show's nature that most analysis of the individual elements does not quite reach. The credits follow each family member through a portion of their day. Homer at the plant, departing from work through the mechanism of the specific scene that has spawned 1,000 memes, the tucking of a glowing piece of radioactive material into his shirt as he leaves the facility. Marge at the grocery store, moving through the checkout with Maggie, the scanner registering Maggie's price in the sequence of grocery items in what has become one of the show's signature small jokes. Bart at school, writing something on the chalkboard as punishment, the specific content of the writing changing across seasons but the structure remaining constant. Lisa at her music lesson, playing the saxophone, the specific note she reaches sending her out of the frame and into the street in a journey that deposits her ultimately at the house. Each vignette is organized around the specific context that defines the character in it. Homer's defining context is the plant. Marge's is the domestic sphere, the grocery store being the specific errand that the domestic sphere regularly generates. Bart's is the school and the specifically punitive relationship with the school that his character embodies. Lisa's is the music, the saxophone, the specific form of self-expression that her character has organized its inner life around. The credits are telling you what each family member's life is primarily made of. And what each family member's life is primarily made of, compressed into the seconds the credits allocate to each of them, is the thing that defines them in relation to the world the show has built. Homer's day begins at the plant and ends with his departure from it. Everything in between is the plant. His life, in the credit sequence's compressed version, is the plant and the drive home from it. The family that the drive home is heading toward is not visible in his vignette. He is moving toward it. It is the destination. But the working day, the exposure, the inadequate monitoring, the glowing cylinder he tucks into his shirt without concern and walks out of the facility with, is what the credits show you as the primary content of Homer's days. Bart's chalkboard writing is always a punishment. The school's relationship to Bart, in the credit sequence, is organized entirely around what Bart has done wrong and the institutional mechanism for addressing it. He is in the classroom, not because the classroom is giving him anything, but because the classroom is the specific institutional context within which his particular form of not quite fitting is being managed through repeated application of the same mechanism that the school has for managing it. Lisa's music takes her out of the authorized space and into the street. The lesson ends, or produces something that ends the lesson, and she is in the world rather than the institution, playing something that the institution was not quite equipped to contain. The specific trajectory of her credit vignette is always from institutional context into the world through the mechanism of music. The music is the thing that exceeds the containers available to her. The Marge and Maggie vignette is the one that carries the most compressed emotional information. The grocery store scanner reads Maggie as a product, gives her a price, places her in the register of things that are purchased and consumed, before the cashier picks her up and hands her back to Marge, who places her back in her appropriate position. Maggie is cataloged. Maggie is priced. Maggie is returned. This plays as a joke. It has always played as a joke. It is also, if you look at it directly, a brief and very specific observation about the economic and institutional framing of childhood in the specific economic and institutional context of the Simpson family's life. Maggie has a price. The store knows what it is. The couch gag ends every version of the credits by assembling the family on the couch and then doing something with that assembly that ranges from the minimally unusual to the entirely impossible, depending on what the season and the specific episode's creative team have decided to do with it. What is constant is the assembly. The family arrives at the couch. They land on it together. Whatever the gag adds to or subtracts from the scene, the fundamental image is of the family converging from their separate days on the same piece of furniture in the same house. This is the closing argument of every opening credits sequence, and it has been the same closing argument for 36 years. The family gathers, the separate trajectories converge, the couch holds them, the plant and the chalkboard and the saxophone and the grocery scanner all precede this image. But the image is the one the credits are moving toward. The day's dispersal, the separate vignettes, the individual routes through the specific context of Springfield's world, all of it is preliminary to the convergence. The opening credits of The Simpsons are a compressed argument for what the show has always considered most important. Not the plant, not the school, not the institutional structures of Springfield that have been explored tonight from multiple angles, and that collectively constitute the context within which the family's life happens. The couch, the family on it. Together, by the end of each day, that is what the credits have been telling you every single time they have played. Section 20. The Simpsons in Time. Why the floating timeline is the show's most honest lie. Every long-running piece of serialized fiction that features characters who do not age is making a decision about what its story is actually about. It is deciding, at a structural level that precedes any individual episode's content, that the story is not a story about time passing and its consequences for the people inside it. It is a story about something else, something that the passage of time would complicate or foreclose, something that requires the specific quality of permanence that only a frozen timeline can provide. The Simpsons' floating timeline is the most visible expression of this decision in American television history because the show has been running for longer than any other American scripted series, and therefore, the gap between the time that has passed in the real world and the time that has passed in Springfield has become impossibly, hilariously, sometimes poignantly large. 36 years in the real world. 0 years in Springfield. The writers and producers of the show have been asked about this across the decades in which the gap has grown from noticeable to absurd, and the answers have been consistent. It is how animated shows work. The floating timeline is a convention of the medium, or at least of the show's specific use of the medium. The alternative, allowing the characters to age, would change the show in ways that its audience would not accept, in ways that would require the show to become something fundamentally different from what it has always been. These answers are honest as far as they go, and they also leave out the part that is most worth saying directly. The floating timeline is the show's deepest expression of what it believes its audience needs from it. Consider what aging the characters would actually require. Not just in the narrative sense, in the sense of the practical plotting challenges it would create, in the emotional sense, in the sense of what the audience is investing in when they invest in The Simpsons, and what would be affected if that investment's terms changed. A significant portion of the show's audience came to it as children or teenagers, in the years when the show was new or in the years of the extended golden age that followed. Those viewers encountered the Simpson family at a specific time in their own lives, when the family's dynamics resonated with their own lives in specific and sometimes intensely personal ways. Homer was their father, in some approximation of the way that a fictional character can be a person's father, the specific combination of love and inadequacy and good intentions that produced outcomes that required interpretation. Marge was their mother. Bart was the self they were afraid to be. Lisa was the self they were afraid not to be. For those viewers, the Simpsons family is permanently associated with a specific period of their own lives. The show exists for them in a kind of temporal space organized around the specific moment of their own development when it entered their consciousness most fully. The show is 36 years old, but it is also, for many of its longest-running viewers, still the age it was when they first encountered it, in the way that important things from childhood remain the age they were when they were first important, rather than acquiring the age they would have if time had been permitted to work on them normally. If The Simpsons aged, if Bart became an adult, and Lisa moved to graduate school and Maggie started speaking in full sentences, those viewers would have to confront the distance between who they were when the family entered their lives and who they are now. The aging of the characters would force the aging of the relationship with the characters, would make visible the gap between the childhood self who first watched the family arrive on a Sunday evening and the adult self who is watching them now. The frozen timeline protects the viewers from this confrontation. It maintains the family at the age they were when they first mattered most. It keeps the show in the specific eternal present that is most useful for its emotional function. The show's floating timeline is not primarily a production convenience. It is an emotional technology for the preservation of a specific relationship between a family in a cartoon and the people who have loved that family across their lives. And like all emotional technologies, it has costs and benefits that are not evenly distributed across the people who use it. The benefit is the preservation. The family stays the same. Bart is still 10. The couch is still there. The show that was there during the difficult years of your adolescence is still there now, still running, still the same. The cost is the confrontation that preservation prevents. The show staying the same while you change means that the distance between you and the show grows with every passing year, even if the show's content does not make that distance visible. The family frozen at their 1,989 ages is increasingly not you in the specific way that people from your past who did not change while you changed are not you in the specific sense of not having traveled the same distance. From the starting point, this cost is real, but it is mostly quiet. The show does not force you to confront it. It protects you from it through the same mechanism that produces the cost. The family is frozen. You do not have to notice that you are not. And so the viewers and the family exist in a relationship that time organizes differently on each side of the screen. The family does not age. The viewers do. The family is still on the couch in 1989. The viewers are in a different place than they were in 1989, a place organized by 36 years of lived experience that the family has not shared. The show knows this. It does not address it directly, because addressing it directly would break the specific magic that the frozen timeline is there to create and maintain, but the show knows it. And across 36 seasons, in the episodes that most clearly have the longest relationship between the viewer and the show in mind, you can see the show making accommodations for this relationship's specific emotional terrain, the nostalgia episodes. The episodes about Homer and Marge's early years, their courtship, the specific period before the show began, when they were becoming who they became. These episodes are organized around a kind of reach toward the past that makes sense only in the context of a show that has been running long enough for its own earlier seasons to have acquired the quality of past. The flash-forward episodes? The episodes that show the family in a future tense, aged and changed and inhabiting the lives that the show's present tense will never reach. These episodes are organized around an acknowledgement that time's direction includes futures the show will not depict in its primary timeline. They are brief permissions to notice that time has been passing even if the characters have not been aging. The anniversary episodes. The episodes that mark the show's own duration as a show, that acknowledge in their self-referential way that the production has been running for a length of time that is itself remarkable. These episodes are organized around the awareness that the relationship between the show and its longest-running viewers is itself a kind of story, one that the show has been telling without directly addressing by continuing to produce new episodes year after year. All of these episode types are the show's accommodation for a relationship that the frozen timeline creates and that the frozen timeline prevents from being directly addressed. They are the show reaching toward the reality that its production choice has made invisible, acknowledging in peripheral and indirect ways that time has passed for someone even if not for the family on the screen. The floating timeline is a lie, but it is the lie the show was built to tell, built on the specific emotional need that the lie serves, sustained across 36 years because the need it serves is real and persistent, and not diminishing as the show continues. We need the family to stay the same because we need the thing the family represents to be permanent. And so it is, in Springfield, if nowhere else. Section 21. The Treehouse of Horror's Secret Continuity. What the non-canon reveals about the canon. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are officially outside the show's continuity. The deaths don't count. The supernatural events don't carry forward. The Homer who is eaten by zombies or transformed into something unrecognizable or placed in a plot drawn from a horror film template is not the Homer whose workday Monday follows. The segments are sealed from the ongoing story. This official sealing is what makes the Treehouse episodes so revealing about the ongoing story. When the show steps outside its continuity, when it removes the commitment to maintaining the characters as they are in the regular run, when it gives itself permission to go to places the regular episodes cannot go, the places it consistently chooses to go tell you what the regular episodes have always been managing, but cannot directly express. The horror of the Treehouse episodes is predominantly domestic horror. The threats that the segments build their scenarios around are predominantly threats to or from the family itself. Aliens who turn out to be manipulating the town's leadership. A murderous doll. A house that wants to consume its occupants. A father who becomes dangerous to his family. A devil who makes deals with a member of the family. The scenarios range in their specific content, but their organization returns consistently to the family as the primary arena in which the horror operates. This is not what horror traditionally takes as its primary arena. Horror more commonly organizes itself around threats from outside the domestic sphere. The monster that comes from beyond the community's perimeter. The evil that arrives from outside and must be expelled to restore safety. The intrusion of the unnatural into the natural world's routines. The Treehouse of Horror episodes reverse this organization with unusual consistency. Their most effective segments are the ones where the horror comes from inside the house, where Homer himself is the threat. where the family's own dynamics, the specific patterns of love and damage and accommodation, and the occasional violence of Homer's frustration are the material that the horror genre's formal tools are applied to. The Shining segment is the canonical example because it is the most famous and because it is the most explicit in its identification of the family's internal dynamics as the horror scenario's raw material. But across the decades of Halloween specials, this pattern recurs too regularly to be accidental. The show knows where its darkness lives. The show knows what the regular episodes are managing through comedy, and the Treehouse format gives it permission to put that material in a horror frame where it can be acknowledged directly rather than managed at a distance. What the Treehouse episodes are doing, in aggregate across 36 Octobers, is providing an annual outlet for the show's awareness of what it normally cannot say. They are the show admitting, once a year, that the family it has spent the remaining 51 weeks presenting as ultimately safe and ultimately intact contains materials that, examined without the protective management of comedy and the plot mechanism of the reset, would look like horror. And then the special ends. The continuity resumes. The horror is sealed back into the non-canon space. The family is on the couch again, intact, in their permanent present, for the remaining 51 weeks. The Treehouse episodes are the show's most honest moment, and also its most safely sealed one. The honesty is real. The sealing ensures that the honesty does not have to change anything about the show's primary project. You can have the horror and the couch. The special ensures they do not have to occupy the same space at the same time. Section 22. Springfield's Children and What the Town is Preparing Them For. Springfield Elementary has been generating a specific product for 36 years, and the product is not what the institution's official mission statement would claim it is. The official mission of a school is educational, to take children at a specific developmental stage and provide them with the knowledge, skills, and frameworks for thinking that will allow them to function effectively in the world they are entering, to give them tools, to prepare them. Springfield Elementary's actual product, visible across hundreds of episodes of depicted school life, is something the official mission statement does not mention, but that the evidence consistently supports. It is producing people who are calibrated to the specific conditions of Springfield. Consider what calibration to the specific conditions of Springfield requires. It requires the development of a comfortable relationship with managed expectations, with the gap between what institutions promise and what they actually deliver. It requires a tolerance for the specific quality of institutional time that moves slowly and that is filled with activities designed to occupy, rather than to genuinely develop. It requires an acceptance of hierarchy that is organized around credentialing and positional authority, rather than competence or genuine achievement in any register that the students might themselves define as valuable. It requires, above all, the specific quality of not asking too much of the system, because the system does not have too much to give. Bart's relationship with the school is the most visible expression of this calibration process, and the way Bart resists the calibration tells you a great deal about what the calibration is trying to produce. Bart refuses consistently to organize himself around what the school asks him to organize himself around. The assessments do not capture anything he values about himself, so he does not put his valued capacities in the service of the assessments. The hierarchy of the school organizes itself around measures of performance that his particular cognition does not reliably produce in the required format, so he operates outside that hierarchy and creates his own based on the social and creative capacities that the school's hierarchy does not recognize, but that the peer social world very much does. This is read by the school and represented within the show as behavioral failure. Bart is a problem to be managed. The management strategies the school deploys are the strategies available to institutions managing behavioral problems within the constraints they operate under. Detention, suspension, the accumulated record of incidents. The repeated meetings between Principal Skinner and Marge that the show has built into a recurring structure because the repetition is itself an observation about what the management strategies are actually achieving. What they are achieving is the sustained management of Bart as a problem rather than any engagement with what Bart is and what the school might do with what Bart is. Bart is not engaged by the school, he is managed by it. And the management is sustained because the alternative, which would require the school to recognize his particular intelligence as something worth developing in ways that the school's current structure is not equipped to do, exceeds what the institution has available. Lisa's experience of the school is the inverse in every dimension. She is the student the school's hierarchy recognizes. She achieves in the measures the school values. The institutional markers accumulate for her in exactly the direction they are supposed to accumulate. She is the school's success story, the student who demonstrates that the system works. And the school is failing her as thoroughly as it is failing Bart, just through a different mechanism. Lisa cannot be challenged by the school because the school's ceiling, in terms of the intellectual difficulty of what it can offer, falls well below Lisa's floor in terms of what her mind requires to actually engage with material. The school keeps her busy. It cannot keep her growing. She moves through its requirements the way a person moves through a space that is too small for them, with a careful precision that is itself evidence of the constriction. The children of Springfield Elementary are being calibrated to accept constriction. The ones who cannot accept it, like Bart, are managed into a tolerable level of resistance through the institutional tools available for that management. The ones who can accept it, like the majority of the background students who appear in crowd scenes and who have no names and no individual stories, learn to accept it and carry that acceptance forward into the Springfield adult world that will ask the same thing of them for the rest of their lives. The school is not a failure. It is accomplishing exactly what a school in Springfield's specific economic and institutional context is built to accomplish. It is producing the next generation of Springfield residents. People who have been calibrated through 12 years of institutional experience to the specific conditions of Springfield life, who have learned what the system rewards and what it punishes, and how to navigate the gap between the two with the minimum productive friction. Bart will resist forever, Lisa will leave, Maggie will wait, the rest of them will become Springfield. And Springfield will continue to be exactly what it has always been, because the institution that was supposed to equip the next generation to examine it critically was itself organized around the specific interests that benefit from the next generation not examining it at all. The school is doing its job. That is the thing that makes it most troubling. Section 23. The House on Evergreen Terrace. What the building knows that we don't. 742 Evergreen Terrace has been standing in Springfield for 36 years. The show has never given us a precise construction date for the house, but it has existed within the show's universe long enough to have accumulated the specific character of a house that has been lived in by the same people for an extended period of time, in which the inhabitation has left marks that the house carries, and that distinguish it from a new building or from a building that has cycled through multiple different families' tenancies. The house is the show's primary physical constant. Springfield changes in the ways that a location the show has been using for 36 seasons changes when different episodes require different things from it, and the continuity of the physical environment has never been the show's highest production priority. The geography of Springfield has been notoriously inconsistent across its run, with the relative positions of landmarks shifting between episodes and the layout of the town failing to conform to any coherent map across its history, but the house on Evergreen Terrace has remained fundamentally the same. The floor plan that the interior shots have established over decades is recognizable. The kitchen is in its expected position. The living room contains the couch and the television and the specific relationship between them that the family's viewing habits have established as their primary domestic leisure posture. The stairs connect the floors in the way that the family's movement between floors requires. Homer's bedroom is where Homer's bedroom has always been. The house has absorbed 36 years of what the Simpson family has brought to it, the catastrophes that individual episodes have inflicted on it, the celebrations, the arguments, the specific quality of evening after evening of the family in the living room doing whatever the evening required of them in whatever episode was providing the context for that evening. There is a theory in the study of domestic architecture, not a scientific theory exactly, but a phenomenological observation with real explanatory purchase, that houses hold the memory of the lives lived in them. Not literally. Not in any way that violates physics or requires something supernatural to sustain, but in the sense that the choices made by the people who have lived in a house, the arrangements, the accumulations, the specific wear patterns on the flooring, and the specific marks on the walls, and the specific organization of the objects within the space, constitute a kind of physical record of the inhabitation. The house becomes, through being lived in, a material autobiography of the people who have lived there. 742. Evergreen Terrace's material autobiography would be extraordinary. It has housed 36 years of Homer's relationship with the refrigerator. It has housed Marge's sustained management of everything the house requires to function. It has housed Bart's experiments with the limits of what the house can structurally tolerate. It has housed Lisa's practicing, the saxophone note drifting through the walls and down the stairs and into the living room, where Homer is watching television, with the specific quality of not listening that characterizes his relationship with Lisa's music in the ordinary register of their relationship. It has housed Maggie in her crib in the room that the show has established as hers, in the specific quality of presence that an infant's relationship to a room produces. The room organized around her specific requirements, the objects arranged for her specific level of engagement with the physical world. The room knows what a year-old child requires because it has been organized around those requirements for 36 years. The house knows things that the family cannot fully articulate. It knows the specific pattern of Homer's late-night kitchen visits, the specific light that falls on the refrigerator in the middle of the night when the rest of the house is dark. It knows the specific sound that Marge's footsteps on the stairs make when she is up before everyone else, in the specific early morning quality of the house before the day has started, and the specific calm that the house has before it becomes fully inhabited by the day's activity. It knows the sound of the family watching television together, the specific quality of the Simpson family's collective viewing experience, Homer's laughter, Marge's occasional murmured responses to the screen, Bart's running commentary, Lisa's interpretive additions, Maggie's pacifier sounds. The house is the container for all of this, for 36 years of it. For the accumulation of 36 years of evening and morning, and the ordinary middle hours of days in which nothing in particular was happening except the family living in the house in the specific way that this family lives in, this house. If the coma theory is true, the house is Homer's most fundamental creation. The specific detail with which his dreaming mind has rendered it, the consistency with which it appears across hundreds of episodes, the way its floor plan and its furniture and its specific domestic objects remain recognizable across all the variations that plot and animation and individual episode requirements impose on it, is the evidence of how deeply the house is built into Homer's interior life. He did not just dream about his family. He dreamed their house. He dreamed every room of it. He dreamed it in enough detail that it has sustained 36 years of story without losing its coherence as a physical place. A man who is dreaming of a house in that much detail is a man who is dreaming about home, not just as a concept, as a specific place, as a specific set of rooms in a specific arrangement with specific furniture and specific light through specific windows at specific times of day. The house is not a set. For Homer, the house is the proof that home existed, that it was real, that it had a physical address and a floor plan and a kitchen where you could get a beer at 2 a.m, and a couch where the family could sit together, and a staircase that connected the floor where you slept to the floor where you gathered. 742. Evergreen Terrace. The most frequently depicted piece of real estate in the history of American television, the place that Homer is always trying to get back to, the place that the show's credit sequence is always moving toward, the place where the couch is, where the family gathers, where the story ends, every week, in the same image. Home. Section 24. The town meeting as Springfield's true religion. What civic life looks like when civic life has failed. Springfield holds town meetings with a regularity that suggests the meetings are genuinely believed by the people who organize and attend them to constitute a meaningful form of civic participation. The meetings are announced, they are attended. The meeting hall fills with the population of Springfield in sufficient numbers to feel like a genuine public gathering. People stand up and speak. The chair recognizes speakers or fails to recognize them in ways that produce comedy. Votes are held. Results are announced. And then, with the specific consistency that has defined Springfield's civic life across 36 years, the results do not produce any lasting change in the underlying conditions that the meetings were ostensibly organized to address. This is not an accident of writing or a laziness of storytelling. It is the show's most sustained and most accurate observation about what democratic participation looks like in a community organized around the economic dominance of a single interest. The meetings happen. The meetings produce decisions. The decisions do not change the conditions because the conditions are maintained by a force that the meeting's decision-making process is not equipped to overcome. Burns does not attend town meetings. He does not need to. The meeting's outcome, regardless of what it is, operates within an environment that Burns has organized. The things the meeting can actually decide about are limited by what Burns permits the meeting to have genuine authority over. The things Burns does not want changed are not subject to change by the meeting's outcome, because Burns's economic control over Springfield is more absolute than the meeting's political authority. The town meeting is Springfield's civic religion in the specific sense that it provides the community with a ritual of participation that feels meaningful and that does not require the community to confront the ways in which the participation is constrained. People attend. People speak. People vote. The ritual is completed. The outcome of the ritual does not alter the underlying power structure, but the completion of the ritual provides the feeling that the community has responded to whatever the meeting was about in a meaningful way. This is not nothing. The ritual matters to the people who participate in it, and mattering to the people who participate is a genuine form of social value. Communities that have no rituals of participation experience the absence of those rituals as a specific kind of demoralization. The meetings give Springfield something real, even if what they give is not what the meetings are officially organized around giving. But the gap between what the meetings appear to provide and what they actually provide in terms of the community's genuine capacity to shape its own conditions is the gap that the show has been examining in every town meeting episode since the beginning of its run. Homer's participation in town meetings is the most consistent portrait of a civic participant who is operating in entirely good faith within a system that is organized against the possibility of the participation making a difference. He attends, he sometimes speaks, he votes, he reacts to the outcomes with the genuine engagement of someone who believes that the process he is participating in is what it presents itself as being. His belief is sincere. It is also continuously undermined by what actually happens after the meetings, which is generally that whatever Burns required to remain unchanged remains unchanged. The people of Springfield continue to attend the meetings. They continue to believe in them in the specific way that people believe in institutions that have not yet exhausted the hope that sustains them. The hope that the next meeting might be different. The hope that the specific combination of speakers and evidence and public pressure assembled at the next meeting might be sufficient to produce an outcome that the previous meetings were not. That hope is the most human thing about Springfield's civic life. It is also the specific quality of the town's relationship to its own situation that Burns depends on most completely. As long as the people of Springfield believe the meetings matter, they will continue to use the meetings as the primary vehicle for their civic energies. As long as they use the meetings, they will not organize the kinds of challenges to his position that actually threaten it. The meetings are the safety valve that prevents the pressure from building to the level at which it would require a different kind of response. Burns did not design this. He does not manage it. It maintains itself, as all the most effective mechanisms of power maintain themselves through the voluntary participation of the people it is organized around. The town hall keeps its doors open. The meetings keep being held. The participants keep arriving, and the conditions the meetings are convened to address keep being the conditions they were when the meetings were called. That is Springfield's civic religion. And like all religions, it is most powerful among the people who need most to believe that it works. Section 25. The last thing we learn in Springfield. What the show has always been teaching us without saying so. For 36 years, across 800 episodes and counting, The Simpsons has been teaching something that none of its promotional materials have ever described as what the show is for. Something that the show itself has never articulated in any episode directly. Something that sits in the structure of the show rather than in any of its specific contents. Something that every single viewer has absorbed through the experience of watching, whether or not they have been aware of absorbing it. The lesson is about the nature of love in actual conditions rather than in ideal ones. There is a version of love that fiction has taught us to expect. It is uncomplicated. It is instantly recognizable. It is confirmed by specific dramatic gestures at specific dramatic moments. It is sufficient in the version that most fiction provides, to overcome the obstacles that the story places in its path. It is what people mean when they say that a story has a satisfying ending, which is typically a story in which the obstacles that kept the love from being fully expressed or fully actualized have been overcome, and the love is now able to exist in the conditions that it deserves. The Simpsons has never provided this version of love, not once. In 36 years and 800 episodes, not once has the show arrived at a moment where the obstacles are overcome and the love exists in the conditions it deserves, and the family is finally in the situation that their love has always been working toward. Instead, every episode returns to the same situation. The same house, the same limitations, the same Homer with the same cognitive damage and the same job at the same plant for the same employer who still, after 3 decades, cannot remember his name. The same Marge managing the same household with the same invisible labor that the same environment fails to recognize. The same Bart performing the same defenses around the same damage. The same Lisa isolated in the same way by the same intelligence in the same town that cannot accommodate her. The same Maggie watching everything in the same silence that she has chosen for the same reasons. The love is real. The conditions are what they are. The love does not overcome the conditions. The love exists within the conditions, alongside the conditions, in the specific relationship to the conditions that real love in real circumstances always occupies. Not transcending what is difficult, but persisting through it. This is what the show has been teaching since its first episode. Not that love conquers all. That love is what you have when the all in question is not conquered and is not going to be conquered, and you have to decide, in the specific circumstances of your specific life, whether the love is enough to make the unconquered all bearable. The Simpson family has decided every week for 36 years that it is. Not because the decision is easy. The show has never let it be easy. The obstacles have been genuine, and the love has genuinely had to work to maintain itself against them. Homer has genuinely threatened the marriage. Marge has genuinely almost left. Bart has genuinely almost been lost to the specific trajectory that his specific damage pointed him toward. Lisa has genuinely almost stopped trying, in a community that does not reward trying of her particular kind. But at the end of every episode, every week, the family is on the couch. The decision has been made again. The love has been renewed in the specific and undramatic way that love in actual conditions is renewed, not through a dramatic gesture, but through the accumulation of small decisions in ordinary moments to keep showing up for the people you are showing up for. The show's most important lesson is hidden in its most visible feature, the couch, the family on it, every week, regardless of what the episode contained. That is what love actually does, when it is real and when it is in actual conditions rather than ideal ones. It puts you back on the couch. It brings you home. And then the next week begins. Section 26. The Plant After Hours. Springfield at 3 in the morning continued. The nuclear power plant operates continuously. It does not close at 5 o'clock. It does not suspend its function over weekends or holidays, or in the hours when the daytime staff has gone home, and the people responsible for its monitoring and maintenance have been replaced by the night shift. The reactor runs. The cooling systems run. The cracked towers that the show has established as the facility's most visible structural integrity problem continue to vent whatever they vent into the night air over Springfield. The same air the town breathes regardless of the hour. Homer is not there at 3 in the morning, except in the occasional episode where a plot requires his presence at the facility outside ordinary hours. But the facility is there. The violations that his daytime presence helps to manage, in the specific sense of making management's absence institutional and invisible, continue to produce their effects without any oversight at all during the hours that Homer and the daytime staff are elsewhere. The night shift workers at the plant are among the Springfield residents the show has depicted least. They appear in background shots of facility scenes, in the crowd context of episodes where the plant itself is the setting. They have not been given names or stories or sustained characterization. They constitute the portion of the facility's workforce that operates in the hours when the principal cast of the show's story is asleep. Their specific experience of working the night shift in a facility with 342 safety violations is something the show has implied rather than depicted. It is an experience organized by the specific quality of night shift industrial work combined with the specific conditions of Springfield's nuclear facility, the reduced oversight, the different quality of attention that the same tasks require at 3 in the morning after 6 hours of night shift work compared to what those tasks require at 10 in the morning in the first hours of a fresh shift. The specific ways that fatigue affects the judgment and attention of the people responsible for monitoring systems that require sustained and reliable human judgment. The violations the plant has accumulated span multiple shifts and multiple years. Some of them are permanent structural failures. The cracked cooling towers, the radiation signatures in the water and the soil around the facility, the consequences of operational practices that predate the current workforce. But some of them are ongoing. The kind of violation that is produced by what happens or fails to happen on specific shifts by specific decisions made by specific people in specific moments of the workday. The night shift decisions, the moments of judgment and failure that happen at 3 in the morning when the facility is operating, and the people responsible for it are doing so with the accumulated fatigue of the early morning hours, are among the most consequential things that happen in Springfield on any given night. They are also among the least witnessed. The monitoring that should be occurring is occurring inadequately on the best days. At 3 in the morning, the quality of that inadequate monitoring is further reduced by the conditions of the shift. Springfield sleeps. The plant runs. The violations continue. And at 7 in the morning, Homer drives to work through Springfield's residential streets, past the houses of the people who have been breathing the facility's output through the night, arriving at his workstation to resume the appearance of oversight that his presence there has always constituted. 27. Marge at the window, what she sees that nobody asks her about. There is an image that appears across dozens of Simpsons episodes in slightly different forms, never dwelt on, never made the subject of the episode's explicit attention, passing in and out of the frame in seconds and carrying with it a specific emotional weight that the show treats as background. Marge at the window. Standing at the kitchen window or at the living room window or at the window of whatever room the episode's blocking has placed her in, looking out at Springfield, at the backyard, at the street, at wherever the window opens onto, with the specific quality of presence that belongs to someone who has paused between one thing and the next and is, briefly, in the space between the tasks that her life requires of her. This pause is not given dialogue. The show does not stop to ask what Marge is thinking in those moments. The moments are texture, beats in the episode's rhythm that communicate something about the character through image rather than through language, that place something in front of the audience without requiring the audience to articulate what it is. What is it? The moments at the window are the moments when Marge is most fully visible as a person who has a relationship to her own life that is different from her relationship to the lives of the people she manages and loves. They are the moments when the management layer is briefly down, when the specific vigilance that keeping everything running requires has paused, when what is present is simply Marge looking out at wherever the window looks. She has been looking out that window for 36 years. Springfield has been there each time she looked. The same streets and the same houses and the same cooling towers and the same yellow sky and the same neighbors and the same town that she chose, in some sense, when she stayed, and that she was never quite choosing in the way that a genuine choice requires when she could have left. What does Marge see when she looks out the window? The show does not ask. The show has never asked. It has placed her at the window across hundreds of episodes and allowed the image to carry its weight without investigation. But the weight is real, and the question implied by the image is real. And the answer to the question, whatever it is something that 36 years of window looking has been accumulating in a person who has never been asked to say it out loud. The window is not a symbol of trapped domesticity in the simple sense that that reading would impose on it. Marge is not imprisoned. She has made choices, repeatedly, and with clear eyes about what the choices entailed, to remain in the house, and in the marriage, and in Springfield. The choices are real. Their cost is real. The view from the window is what she has chosen to look at, but the view is also what it is. Springfield. The plant's towers visible from the right angle. The Flanders house next door. The specific small geography of a life that has organized itself around this view for 3.5 decades, what she thinks about it, standing at the window in the 30 seconds between the last task and the next task, is the most private thing in the show. The show has never given it to us. It has given us the image of her standing there and has allowed us to understand that something is happening in those moments that we are not being told directly. That privacy is a form of respect. The show has always understood that Marge deserves one thing that is fully hers, that does not require management or expression or translation into the language that the household and the family and the community need from her. The 30 seconds at the window, what she sees there is hers. Section 28. Everything Burns has built and what it will outlast. Burns will die. This is the proposition that the show has built its Burns mythology around refusing, but it is also the proposition that the logic of what the show has established about Burns ultimately points toward, because the specific mechanism of his survival, the weekly treatment, the disease equilibrium, the infrastructure of wealth deployed in service of biological maintenance, is elaborate and impressive and utterly mortal in the specific sense that all elaborate and impressive things built by human beings are mortal. The treatments can fail. The equilibrium can break. The infrastructure can be disrupted in ways that the wealth cannot instantaneously repair. Burns knows this. He has spent a century knowing it, which is why the century has been organized so completely around the prevention of the disruption. The prevention is the fullest expression of what his wealth has actually been for. Not pleasure, not the accumulation for its own sake, the continuation. But everything Burns has built will outlast him. The plant will outlast Burns. When Burns dies, the plant will continue operating, because plants of that kind do not stop operating simply because their owner ceases to exist. The violations will continue to accumulate under whoever takes control of the facility, because the violations are built into the facility's infrastructure at a level that no change of ownership will immediately address. The water downstream from the plant will continue to carry what the plant has always put into it. The three-eyed fish will continue to live in it, or their descendants will, as evidence of what has been happening there for generations. The people of Springfield will continue to live inside the environmental footprint of what Burns built and operated, because they cannot move the town and they cannot relocate the plant and they cannot undo what 36 years of inadequate containment has deposited in their environment. The yellow skin will remain. The mutations, whatever form they take in each successive generation born into the contamination zone, will be the inheritance that Burns's operation bequeaths to the town long after Burns himself is not available to be held responsible for them. This is the thing about institutional harm that the show has been depicting honestly for 36 years without being able to state it in a single episode's worth of plot. The people who cause institutional harm are mortal. The harm they cause is not. It persists beyond the individual who initiated it, in the systems and the environments and the bodies and the minds of the people who continue to live inside what was built. Burns will die, and the plant will remain. The plant's output has been in Springfield's water for longer than most Springfield residents have been alive. It will be in the water of their children and their children's children, at diminishing but not zero concentrations, for a span of time that extends well past any reasonable accounting horizon. Burns has built something larger than himself. He did not intend to. He did not organize his century of operation around the production of an environmental legacy. He organized it around the production of his own continuation. The environmental legacy is the byproduct of the production, the thing that accumulated alongside the wealth and the power and the maintenance infrastructure without being the object of any of those activities. The most powerful things are usually byproducts. Burns is a clever and ruthless and in some ways genuinely extraordinary man who has organized a century of effort around the production of his own survival. What he has produced in the process of that organization is a contamination zone, a captive population, a family across 3 generations broken by his specific and personal retributive action, and an environmental record that will outlast the organism that generated it by several half-lives of the material it deposited. He has won. The show has established this clearly. The question the show has never quite asked is, what has he won? He is alive. He is powerful. He is maintained by treatments that require perfect schedule adherence to continue working, and by an assistant whose own continuation is the primary condition of Burns's continuation, and by an infrastructure of wealth that has been organized around his survival for a century and that will require maintaining for as long as the survival continues. He is alive in the specific way that a machine is alive. through the continuous input of resources and maintenance without which the machine would cease to function immediately. His existence is the existence of something that cannot be left alone, that requires constant attention from the specific people and systems whose attention it has organized itself around receiving. This is what a century of organizing everything around your own survival produces. Not freedom, the opposite of freedom, the most complete dependency on specific conditions and specific people that any person in Springfield has ever constructed. Burns is the most powerful man in Springfield and the most thoroughly imprisoned one. His prison is built from the specific requirements of his continued existence. The treatments, Smithers, the infrastructure, the weekly schedule that cannot be missed without lethal consequence, the conditions that must be maintained for the machine to keep running. He won Springfield. The winning looks like this. Section 29, Springfield as America, the town that was always a mirror. There is a reason that the show's creators made the deliberate choice not to locate Springfield in a specific state, not to anchor it geographically in a way that would make it the portrait of one particular region rather than of the country as a whole. The reason is that Springfield was never meant to be about one place. It was meant to be about the recurring form that American community takes, the specific arrangement of economic dependency and civic aspiration and institutional failure and genuine human warmth that has characterized American towns across their entire history, regardless of their specific geographic location. The nuclear plant is not a plant in any specific state. It is the primary employer of a town that cannot afford to challenge it. Every American town has had one of those, in some form across its history. The company that was too big to confront. The industry that was too essential to regulate. The employer whose continued presence was the precondition for the town's continued economic viability and whose requirements, therefore, shaped everything the town could and could not do. The political establishment that aligns with the dominant economic interest is not Springfield-specific. It is the natural equilibrium of every community in which one economic interest is dominant enough to make alignment with it the path of least resistance for the people seeking to hold political office. The specific corruption of Quimby's administration is the comedic exaggeration of a pattern that operates in every community where this equilibrium has been established. The exaggeration is what makes it comedy. The pattern is what makes it recognition. The civic amnesia that the Skinner episode exposes most directly. The community's collective ability to decide that the truth is less important than the maintenance of a comfortable fiction is a feature of American civic life that does not require a radioactive power plant or a cartoon framework to be visible. Real communities do this. Real towns have buried real scandals under real collective agreements, not to look at what the scandal reveals about the community's own complicity in the conditions that made it possible. The specific mechanics of Springfield's truth-burying are comedic. The underlying capacity for truth-burying is fully operational in the actual world. The family at the center of the town, navigating its conditions with varying degrees of success and damage and genuine love, is every American family across every American town, across the entire history of American television's attempt to depict what American families are actually like, rather than what the medium's commercial requirements prefer them to be. The Simpsons is the most sustained attempt American television has made to depict what it is actually like to be a family living inside the conditions that American economic and social life produces. Not the ideal family. Not the family that the advertising surrounding the show is trying to sell products to by depicting the aspirational life those products will help provide. The family that is actually there, in the house that they can afford, in the town that their employment has placed them in, loving each other with the specific and imperfect love available to people who are also managing everything else that the conditions of their lives require them to manage. The yellow skin, the four fingers, the physics-defying hair, and the eyes that push slightly too far out of the face. The features that the mutation theory explains through radiation, and that the animation theory explains through stylistic choice, and that the show's internal logic explains through the specific look of people who have been inside. These conditions for long enough that the conditions have become visible on them. We look like Springfield because Springfield looks like us. Not in the literal sense. In the specific sense that the exaggerations the show uses to render its world are exaggerations of things that are present in the world it is exaggerating. The plant is the plant. The employer who cannot remember your name is the employer who cannot remember your name. The water with something wrong in it is the water with something wrong in it. The town meeting that doesn't change anything is the town meeting that doesn't change anything. The family on the couch at the end of the week, still together, still intact, still choosing each other despite everything the week contained. That family is us. That couch is our couch. That house on that street in that impossible town that exists everywhere and nowhere is the place we all grew up in the specific sense that the conditions the show depicts are conditions we recognize because we have been inside them, in our different specific forms, and our different specific towns, and our different specific versions of the employer who cannot remember our name.